Hello, folks. Welcome back. Welcome back. It is time. It is time to go back into the Fuster clock. That is the Delphi trial from last year, where Rick Allen was in mine and a whole lot of other people's opinion wrongfully convicted. We didn't, and that he got convicted and sentenced and everything last year, November, I believe. We didn't get the transcripts until, what was it, July? August? July, somewhere around there. And so since then, I have read from beginning. I have talked to you guys about this is weird. There's something missing here. And all the inaudibles and stuff. It's infuriating and it's very tolling on me, on my psyche, knowing all that I know and you guys might know about this case, about the evidence, and reading through what McLeland does, the prosecutor, what Judge Gull does. It's infuriating. I should be reading more often, but every time I go through these damn things, I need to recuperate. And because it is infuriating and it is taxing. But here we are again. We left off last time with the July 31st things. We were up to the, so to speak, closing arguments in those passages, which with the safekeeping order and all of that stuff. Now, we know what happened. We know what happened. And I read through the closing arguments, and it was more or less just reiterating what was said before. And yeah. So, now we are... So I just skipped that. Sorry. Because in the big scheme of things, it wasn't nothing new. And I wanted to get to what we are going to talk about today, which is the defense going for asking the court for allowance to bring in the third-party culprit defense through the Franks motions. And or whatever they call it, what happened on August 1st, 2024. Hi, Jen. Hi, Turnips. Hi, T42. Dave. Becky. Gwendolyn. Oh, hold on. There you are. And everybody. Hello, folks over at Twitch. And hello, folks on Rumble. Hello, folks. Good to have you all. Good to have you all here. Good to have you all here. So, folks, this is what we are going to do now. Let's see if I can't. There you go. Oh, all right. Are you all ready? Let's go. This is just after they gave the final presentations in the prior motions, where Judge Gull starts off with, "Thank you very much for your presentations. I appreciate it. You very much condensed the issues for my review. Are we ready then to proceed to the state's motion in limine?" Okay. Hold on while I just check something here. Page 37. Yeah. Yes, I was just checking here, so I'm at the right position. So, state's motion in limine. We will get through. So we are now at August 1st. There's a motion in limine in place that the state is asking for. All right. Mr. Rossi, could I have just a minute to clean up? Maybe kind of inaudible. And let's see, where are my inaudibles? There was none during the final presentation, so now we are at inaudible number 44 in these transcripts. Yay. Sure, do you need like a quick break or something? Well, maybe 5 minutes would be good. 5 minutes? All right. McLeland, just before we take that break, yes, can we approach briefly? Sure, come on up. Sidebar conference. McLeland, inaudible. Mr. Bolin, right here facing this way. I may, inaudible. So it's, yeah, good start. The court, and just keep them. I mean, there's no reason to display those to the audience. There are nobody in this game. I'm the person that needs to see whatever evidence that you want to display. So there's no reason to display those to the audience. There are nobody in this game. This is, if any few words exemplifies Judge Gull, it is this. She, throughout this case, tried to block and successfully blocked almost everything to be displayed to the public. Now, this is a hearing. This was not a closed hearing. So this is stupid. But this is how Judge Gull thinks of the public. They are just the audience. They are nobody in this game. What fucking game? Why are the public nobodies in your eyes, Judge Gull? Is the court clerk hearing impaired? Yeah, that is our guess. That is our guess. In the entirety of the transcripts are 21 volumes, 250 pages each, and I believe somebody counted it, all of it, and there's over 500 inaudibles. I spoke to Steve Gosney, the Florida, Steve Gosney, who still is a licensed death penalty appellate attorney, and he has, his record is 200 inaudibles. This is over 500. So yeah, we would guess that she is hearing impaired, or worse, she doesn't care. I'm the person that needs to see whatever evidence you want to display, so yeah, that's how she views the people who she has a constitutional obligation to be transparent before the public. But she doesn't see it that way. Bailiff, quiet in the gallery, please. We're still on the record. The court, thank you. McLeland, inaudible. $47. The court, I mean, when we get to trial, that's a pretty different situation, Mr. Cleland. Sure, the court, And we'll have to take a look at inaudible, 48. But for purposes of this hearing, I'm the fact finder, and I'm the one that needs to see whatever is on these boards, not the audience members. So if you could limit the display to me, I would appreciate that. Miss Auger, inaudible. 49. The court, well, and I saw that, but I mean, there were times when inaudible. 50. When you double flashing things around, and it would be a little bit disconcerting when you don't expect to see, oh, whoa, wow, look at that. Mr. Rossi, I just realized that my screensaver on my computer is my wife's face, and they were staring, every time, and they're looking right at her, and I'm just thinking little things like that. I'm not, They go, does your wife know that her face is all over? Mr. Rossi, no, that's what I'm saying. I would usually not sit there, and the court, okay. So we'll be inaudible. 51. It's just that's whatever's on the poster boards that they don't need to be displayed to the audience. Mr. Rossi, the full conversation. The court, right? Yeah. Okay, so like 5 minutes to just get organized and figure out where we are. Mr. Rossi, so we're dealing with the state's motion in limine, right? The court, yeah, that's the only thing we have left. Well, the state's motion and your response. And before we get into that, I think we can narrow it even further. Okay. Thank you. The court, all right. Sidebar conference concluded. The court, let's take 5. Jody, you can go off the record. They took 9 minutes. The court, okay. Mr. McClellan, we can get started, Judge. Mr. Luttrell went down to use the restroom, but that's fine. The court, okay, all right, very good. So we are ready then to proceed on the state's motion in limine and the defendant's response. That's our last motion for the scheduled hearings, correct? Yes, Your Honor. Mr. Rossi, you ready? Yes, I'm sorry. Okay, yes, I'm ready. The court, okay. So we're all organized now for the presentation of this. Is there any issue? I know I said this up at the bench earlier, but we might be able to kind of shorten this part of the hearing considerably. Is there any disputes about the paragraphs 1 through 6 of the state's motion in limine? I mean, I know that the defense filed a response objecting to all of those things, but Mr. McClellan, are you? The court. I mean, it's pretty common practice. I mean, there's lots of case law. There's lots of rules that cover the things contained in a motion in limine 1 through 6. So, Mr. Rossi, may I? Court, yes. Mr. Rossi. Yeah, Judge, I mean, this is my view of it. And I guess I can just kind of group 1 through 6. These are all requests that are covered by primarily the ethical rules of professional conduct. That is, and so in my mind, what the state is asking for here is to basically say, you need to tell the defense they need to follow the rules. I mean, that's really kind of what these requests are. Any comment about counsel for the state that constitutes a personal attack on the attorney for the state or comments on the role of the state's attorney? Well, I can tell you, I've read every one of those cases that was cited, and they're all cases where prosecutors have said things during trials that violate a defendant's right. For example, I think there was a case where the prosecutor was a drug prosecutor in that community, and he basically said during the trial, I don't like drug dealers and I'm bringing them down. And of course, the defendants were charged with drug dealing, and of course, you can't inject those kinds of comments into the record. And so that's just an example of most of the examples I saw are actually directed to the prosecutor, of course, because the defendant's rights are typically first and foremost in these processes. So without me belaboring that, I think we already got a pretty good feel for this. I guess to the extent we would object, I'm objecting because he's asking for a one-sided prayer for relief. And I think the professional rules dictate how we act in trial. We can't inject our personal beliefs because the professional rules prohibit that in the middle of the proceeding. And so, that's number 2. And then number 3, the innuendos or references to those, they're all the same. The other set of these pertains to what we can do when we voir dire. Or voir dire. The court, Mr. Rossi. And you, I'm sure you have a really good handle on that, knowing your background. You know, I think the general rule is we're not to condition jurors in the process. But there are definitely cases that exist that do allow us to question jurors on fundamental issues that they would be addressing during the trial if they were selected. So, for example, there was a case that said it's an error to deny the defendant's right to any interrogation of prospective jurors upon the subject of self-defense. Well, that's a material element of the case, and it's one of those things that we can talk about. I mean, so I think what the state is asking is for you to curtail conditioning. That's the word I've always kind of used, and that's all guided by the professional rules and the jury rules. And so we intend to follow them, and until there's some violation of that, I don't think there's any prayer that's necessary. And to the extent there is, it should go both ways. Court, Mr. McClelland. Mr. McClelland says, Judge, I guess I'm going to steal a line from the defense before they say something offensive about the state or accuse me of being corrupt. So I'll say, with all due respect, I don't file these in every case. I don't file a motion in limine because we are all held by the professional rules of conduct. I felt it necessary in this case, given the prior filings by defense, the prior actions by defense, and in my motion, I'm not asking that this be one-sided. I think this applies to both the state and the defense. These are standard rules that apply to professional conduct, but in this case, I think they're necessary given the prior actions from the defense. I think it's necessary to talk about these things and remind and admonish the defense that these are the rules and that these are expected to be followed by the court. So that those are the reasons for rules 1 through 6. I spoke with Mr. Baldwin before we went on the record today on this hearing. I think the real meat and potatoes of the motion is 7 through 12, number 7, number 8, number 11, and 12, and all deal with third-party motive. So this, as I said, is about the almost fundamental right in most states for the defense to bring forward a third-party culprit defense. There are exceptions, and Indiana is one of them, where you have to apply for a third-party culprit defense. And it's insanely stupid. Insanely stupid. And we talked about that, and those are all the same, just different aspects of third-party motive. Number 9 deals with geofencing and whether or not it's reliable enough to bring into evidence from the court. Let me just say this about geofencing, folks. If the state, in this case, thought that geofencing was crucial, they would have gone beyond and above to get geofencing in. This tells us all we need to know about the geofencing. Rick Allen's phone was not at the crime scene when the prosecution claims the girls were abducted and killed. Because if he was anywhere close, they would have fought tooth and nail to get geofencing in. And whether or not it's reliable enough to bring into evidence from the court. And then number 10 just talks about the 404B, which again I think can be lumped in with number 1 through 6 standard, tons of case law. 404B applies to all witnesses, not just the defendant. And so just wanted to remind the defense that that does apply to all the witnesses and not just not just the defendant. So I think 10 could be lumped in with 1 through 6. I think the real heart of the issues is 7, 8, 9, 11, and 12. Judge, with the majority of that focused on third-party motives. Okay, says the court. Mr. Baldwin. I agree, Judge. I'm going to be handling most of the third party, with Jennifer doing a little bit of it. I don't disagree with Nick. He's also indicated that he believes the burden shifts once he raises the issues of knowing the Frank's memo and other filings, that's what we're doing. I don't, even if I disagree with it, I just don't think it's practically. It would be practically wise for him to start. I don't know how it would happen. I think we on the defense side need to present the evidence on third-party suspect, and we're prepared to do that. And so the court. Okay, so we all agree that paragraphs 1 through 6 and 10 are applicable mutually. Mr. Baldwin, yes. Mr. McLellan, yes, Your Honor. Folks, for some odd reason, this is something that I see throughout this, that in a normal case, normal trial, I would be perfectly fine with these things. Lump these together, make it stipulate that, do this. In this case, I believe it's a mistake, because this is not a normal case. It never was. And if you're going to argue and get everything on the record, I would suggest, not legal advice, that if you are in trouble in Indiana, tell your attorney to stipulate to absolutely jack shit nothing. Make the prosecution work for every fucking sentence. Every fucking word. Not legal advice. The court, you never tried a jury trial in front of me. I run a tight ship, and I hold you to the rules. I hold you to the ethical standards. How about you hold yourself to ethical standards, Judge Gould? I hold you to the case law. How about you hold yourself to the case law? So as long as we're all on that same page. When I read this, I thought, are we really going to argue whether or not we can attack each other in a court of law in violation of the ethics? So I'm glad to hear that is not the issue. That is not what we're going to be doing. So paragraphs 1 through 6 and 10 on the 404B can be granted, understanding that they are mutually applicable to both sides. So that we are really going to be focusing on 7 through 9 and 11 and 12. Here, that is another mistake. Because the wordings of before by McLellan was he was deeply offended by being called corrupt. You are corrupt, Nick McLellan. You are deeply, deeply corrupt, morally and ethically. And that should be for the defense to point out in trial. But it seems like they stipulated to it, which I believe was a mistake. Mr. McLellan, yes, Your Honor. Mr. Baldwin, yes. The court, all right, great, thank you, all right. Then we are ready to proceed. So 7 through 9, I agree with counsel. That appears to be the defense theory on the third-party perpetrators. Clearly, the case law is very clear that there has to be a nexus between the crime and the third-party perpetrators. I haven't read what is coming next, but we all know that 2 of the third-party culprits have confessed in one shape or form or another. We know that out of the 4 people that are credibly involved in this, 3 has 0 alibi, and 1 has one that can be questioned. How many nexuses does she need? Well, Andrea Burkhart read through the case law and the paragraphs regarding third-party culprit. One of the things that are in the case law as a nexus is confessions. And Judge Gull ignored it. One other thing is there another person's DNA? Well, we know it wasn't Rick's DNA, but they never tested any DNA except what they did was test enough to exclude Rick Allen, and then they stopped. Did they compare the limited testing they did to the other people? No. Why would they? That would ruin their case if it turns out that somebody known was at the crime scene. So we know that already. So who's going first? Mr. Baldwin, Judge, I would ask for a separation of witnesses. The court, okay, I'll grant the request for separation of witnesses. Are you going to reserve anybody, either of you? Mr. McClellan, Judge, I do have a witness, but what officers are you going to call? Mr. Baldwin, who is it? Mr. McClellan, what officers are you going to call? All the subpoenaed officer? Mr. Baldwin, I'm going to call Holman, Cecil, and Vito. Likely. McClellan, okay, do you want the other subpoenaed officers separated as well? Yeah, just in case. Okay, thank you. Are they in the room, Mr. McClellan? They are, Judge. The court, okay. So those of you that have been subpoenaed on this state's motion in limine and the defendant's response are under a separation of witness order. You can talk about the case among yourselves or with anyone else. You need to stay out of the courtroom until you're released from subpoena. You may speak with the attorney that subpoenaed you. Mr. Rossi, Judge, can I just have 1 second with Mr. Baldwin on the court? Sure, procedural matters? Yeah. Mr. Baldwin, what we're talking, if I may, what we're talking about is Detective Vito. He served a couple of purposes. Brad is handling one, the Keegan-Klein argument. I'm handling most of the others, or all of the others, and he has a multi-purpose, and so he's like, do we want to do both at once? And from the presentation standpoint, does the court or the state object to that? Would they object if we called him twice? Would they mind doing both of those? The court, I have no preference. Baldwin, okay. Rossi, I think it'd be clearer. The court, okay. Mr. Rossi, if you just heard one. Back to buckets. You can see how my brain is functioning. But I think it would be cleaner if we did it that way, if that's all right. The court, all right, that's fine. Very good, Mr. Baldwin. Judge, I have an opening statement that I think will give context for everybody. I think it will help the state even. Go ahead. Mr. Baldwin, I'll start with Joyner versus State. Is what we look at. The Indiana Supreme Court in 1997. Quote, evidence is relevant when it has any tendency to make the existence of any fact that is of consequence to the determination of the action more probable or less probable. Evidence which tends to show that someone else committed the crime logically makes it less probably that the defendant committed the crime and therefore meets the definition of relevant. So we look at the words any tendency. Does the evidence that we're about to show you, Judge, in a moment tend to show that there is a connection? And we'll be calling today several law enforcement officers. 2 of those we have subpoenaed in are Kevin Murphy, who we have heard from the other day, and also Todd Click. There are fact witnesses who, for lack of better words, I think you will find support defense theory that there is a nexus. There are detectives on the case, and they will be supporting, I think, through their words, through their testimony, the defense theory that third-party suspects are involved in the crime. Hi, Rhonda. We also will have one fact witness named Amber Holder, who will be testifying concerning Brad Holder, who is one of the prime third-party suspects. We will also start with our expert named Dawn Perlmutter, who is a ritualistic crime scene murder expert. We will be tendering depositions, reports, photographs. I gave to the state a flash drive yesterday with basically giving them the outline of what we're doing, and it may not be in the exact order depending on how things go. But I'm going to give that to the court as well. I think Nick is not going to object to that exhibit when we tender it, and that way you will have that. I also have paper copies, and these hearings get to be a little bit unusual because they're not like trial. I'm going to do my best to move along so that you guys aren't here until 7. And so hopefully we can move this along with everything that I got ready. So here's what the preview of the evidence is. Until Richard Allen was arrested, you will find out, Judge, that law enforcement believed that multiple people were involved in this case in the murders. That's what you're going to hear. We believe that too. We believe that evidence supports that multiple people were involved in the murders of Abby and Libby. What evidence exists of that? First, Kevin Murphy will testify at some point in time that he started, that in the investigation of the murders around day 7 after the bodies were found, and from that day until the day he no longer was working on the case, it was really only talked about that multiple people were involved in the crimes. I wish they would have called Nick McLeland as a witness. In prior hearings, and we read the transcripts, is that I believe it was the safekeeping order, that one of the reasons was they believed there were more people involved. That was Nick McLeland who said that in a prior hearing back in 2023, I guess. Let's continue. You will hear him testify that it was always 2 or 3 people, maybe as many as 5 or 6. It was really never one person. What other evidence will there be that it was multiple people? And this is important because, our third-party suspect are multiple people. You're going to either hear testimony or read a deposition that Toby Lazenby, he believed that it was more than one person. He would believe it was at least 2 people. And also that Tony Liggett shared the same belief. And the reason was there was too much to do in such a short period of time on the terrain where the bodies was found. And that's why at least those 2 always believed very specific evidence of what Toby Lazenby said. Now, Sheriff Liggett no longer subscribes to that belief. That change, you will learn, happened after Richard Allen was arrested, and there needed to be only one person. What else? What type of evidence will you see related to only more than one person? The crime scene itself. You will hear about it, and I will be asking the court to take judicial notice of Frank's 1. Because in that, there is the one section that talks about, in great detail, everything that needed to be done. And I think that is additional evidence of why more than one person was involved here. And that would be previewed. And then the time of 1 hour and 17 minutes, that is additional evidence that we will be arguing that shows multiple people, multiple third-party suspects. You will also hear, Judge, that the narrative from the very beginning of this case, this is a big deal that we will be hounding on, that these murders happened between 2:13 p.m. and 3:30 p.m. And that was locked in by day 7. Kevin Murphy again will testify to that as soon as he got on the case, there was never any other consideration at all other than Abby and Libby were dead and in place where they were found on the 14th by 3:30. Found on the 14th by 3:30 on the 13th. And what evidence do we have of that? Again, you're going to hear from Kevin Murphy and others, I suspect. You will hear evidence perhaps from Jerry Holman that that's the case. That it's always been 3:30 is the end date. Now, what evidence will you hear that tends to show this? I talked about Murphy, his testimony, but also you're going to hear a lot about the number 4:33 a.m. You're going to hear a lot about that today. You're going to find out something quite unbelievable, and that is that up until just a few months ago, May the 15th to be exact, Chris Cecil, who you will hear from, didn't even know that Libby's phone turned on at 4:33 a.m. and connected with the tower. And the reason is, and I think you will say this, because the narrative from the very beginning was the girls died on the 13th by 3:30 p.m. There was no reason to look at anything on the 14th. And Chris Cecil didn't on her Celebrite or on her phone extractions. And that would be another example of what tends to show that they were stuck at this 3:30 p.m. end time, when the defense believes there's evidence that those girls were somewhere else. Well, what evidence cuts against that narrative that would tend to show that the girls were possibly somewhere else and not deceased by 3:30 p.m.? Well, you're going to find something we call, the defense calls the Blocher report. It's really, and you get this report, it's really a Steve Mullin report, but he talks about Blocher. You're going to find out Mitch Blocher, sadly, he has died, but he was an important guy in the state police that understood how the phones worked, and he had been involved in locating phones. Similar situation, somebody's missing. Who do we go to? We go to Mitch Blocher, and he's going to be able to find the phone. And what we're going to find out, that after Mitch Blocher reviewed this, the information from AT&T on the 13th, as these ping, and you're going to hear about pings. Pings were coming in. He analyzed the reports from AT&T, and what he concluded around 10 p.m. on the 13th was one of two things has happened. Either that phone is no longer in working order, or they're not in the area. Those were the two things that Mitch Blocher said he concluded. Now you will find out that the phone was not broken. It was in working order. How do you know that? Because you're going to find out again at 4:33 a.m. the phone turned on. Somebody turned it on, and it connected to the tower. And you're going to find out that then all these text messages that had been languishing out in the ethosphere, all these people that were trying to get a hold of Libby, trying to find out where she was, all those people from around Delphi and their family and friends, finally at 4:33 a.m., 15 text messages matriculated. They hit the tower once the phone was on and it connected, and at 4:33 a.m. when the phone was turned on. That there were those emails landed. They're called SMS messages. So we know that the phone was working. You're going to find that out. So that leaves us with they were out of the area. That was Mitch Blocher's second opinion there. Option one, it was broken. It wasn't broken. What other evidence is there that it cuts against the narrative that these, Libby and Abby, were deceased by 3:30 p.m.? Well, there is an access road. When you go down the hill, there is an access road down the hill. You will hear about that. Search party. You're going to find out that there were hundreds of people searching for Abby and Libby starting very early, 4:30, 5 o'clock, all the way up to around midnight. Hundreds of people. And these, and AW, and Abby and Libby were not found very far from the bridge, a few hundred yards. Nobody saw the bodies on the 13th. They saw the bodies on the 14th. This supports and cuts against the narrative that Abby and Libby were deceased on at before 3:30 p.m. on or about on the 13th, and that they were where they were found on the 14th. We're going to give you the autopsy report where there was no time of death. This is no body temperature. Yeah, folks. The coroner or medical examiner decided to not measure body temperature because he then would have used the rectal thermometer. He claimed he didn't use it because he was afraid to destroy evidence. Mr. Coroner, Mr. Medical Examiner, what evidence did you believe would be found there? Why is it that close to 100% of all medical examiners are able to measure body temperature, but you didn't? Why wasn't it important to you to find out the time of death, or at least narrow it in? Because, folks, had he measured the body temperature and concluded that this must have happened within 6 hours, then we are looking for completely different suspects. Then not one of the people who later on who claimed they had alibis. But the medical examiner ruined that. Ruined it completely. It's unbelievable, the amount of incompetence in this case. And that asshole, that medical examiner, still works. Yeah, and as Gigi points out, what kind of evidence did he expect to find there in that cavity that he couldn't preserve by preserving the thermometers? It's sheer incompetence through and through from every law enforcement officer and the medical examiner. This medical examiner not measuring body temperature, I hold at the same level as the medical examiner who decided that on that woman that no, she self-ended via stabbing herself in the back of the neck 10 times, 10, 12 times. That's the level of absolute fuckery. We'll then move into the phase of the Norse paganism or Odinism part. And you're going to find out different people are going to talk about that. One person you're going to at least get her deposition is FBI agent Nicole Robertson. It's very difficult to get these people in for a deposition. We did get her in for a deposition, and she said in her deposition that the bodies were moved and staged. And sticks. They were looking for any suspect that may have had rune-related items, like Ron Logan. Why is that? Because of the sticks that were on their body. The FBI reports that we entered into evidence earlier, they're not reports, they're emails. You know, we tendered that in because on the February 17th, they're talking about Norse paganism that early. It's not like this just came out of nowhere. There's evidence of it. And here's what it said. Quote, focused on what we may be called pagan ritual because of the placement of sticks and branches on the girls' bodies, end quote. That was between the state police and the FBI. Everybody was aware of Norse pagan, possibilities there at a minimum. Then you're going to hear from Dr. Dawn Perlmutter. In fact, we're going to probably put her on first because she got to get on an airplane. You're going to hear about her experience. She is a subject matter expert in the area of atypical homicide and ritualistic crime investigation. What you're going to hear from her is that's not a self-ascribed title. Subject matter expert in ritualistic crime investigations. That's how the federal government pays her. That's the designation under which she gets paid as a subject matter expert on ritualistic crime investigations and atypical homicide. You're going to find out that she has written the book on ritualistic crimes in investigation, the Law Enforcement Field Guide, Institute for the Research of Organized and Ritual Crimes. She has written chapters and introductions for encyclopedias, analyzing sacrificial violence, ritualistic crimes. These are peer-reviewed documents that she has developed courses and taught courses to the FBI on ritual homicide investigations, ritualistic crime scene investigations. Those that aren't homicide, just, other different type of crimes, symbolic analysis methodologies, racially motivated violent crime, violent extreme. And she has written or taught classes on that. She is no doubt going to be considered an expert. And what she's going to do is give you what I would say a 30,000-foot view to start with. Quote, what I teach FBI to look for in ritualistic crime scenes, end quote. And what she's going to tell you is, and we're going to go through those, and what she's going to tell you this crime scene is textbook for ritualistic murders. Textbook. And she will go through her analysis of why. and we will show you the crime scene photos so that you can see and she can point to what she's talking about and why this was a ritualistic killing. She will also talk about something called magical thinking. You will hear, Judge, that the BAU unit, I think this is what the state will be saying, they determined that this was not, ultimately, they determined this was not a ritualistic killing. This was not Odinism. And Dr. Perlmutter will say that's because they're using wrong methodology. They're using a Western-style methodology, and it's inappropriate. What you use is something called magical thinking. These are people that they're not, this is not about, she'll do a much better job than I would. This is not about trying to profile people. This is a different ball game altogether. And she will talk to you about why the BAU unit, if it as accurate that they dismissed Norse paganism, why they did and why they did it incorrectly. And she gives you a 30,000 foot view. She's going to drop down more to the third-party suspects. And what she's going to tell you is you can't look at any single ritualistic crime scene and compare it to any other, because it's all very personal to the person or the people. Whoever committed these crimes, it's very personal to them. These runes, I would call them runes that were left behind. The sticks that were formationed up around Abby and Libby, what was marked on the tree. The only people that know what that means really are the people who placed the sticks and marked the tree. And you will learn that the reason is, in part because of the technology and the internet, there is no standardized form of paganism or Nordic paganism. There isn't. You will learn this from, she will go on and talk about that. So it's very personal to that person or to the people that committed a crime. Once she gets out of that, then we're going to be going to the third-party suspects. And she's going to tell you, quote, this is how you found these people. Because you need to see is there similarities between what that personally, or those people personally left behind at the scene, and what you can find in their house or on the internet or on their Facebook page. And you're going to find that Brad Holder, who is a prime suspect, there is much reason to believe that he was involved. And certainly that evidence that you will see tends to show that he was involved. What evidence are we going to see here today that might tend to show that he was involved in the crime? Well, he was the father of Logan. Logan dated Abby. He has, as you heard the other day, he has changed his story from 3 days after the girls were murdered and found. He said, I'd never met Abby. Then he changed it to 1. And then he changed it to 2. And, quote, I was at Patrick Westphal's house on one of those with Abby. And he is also a suspect. What else is there that tends to show that Brad Holder was involved in these crimes? Well, you already seen a preview of some of this on Tuesday. There are images on the social media that bear unmistakable likeness to the crime scene. A crime scene that was kept quiet and nobody knew about. For instance, the sticks that were found on Abby, he wrote on his hand. You will see that. You've already seen that. And even Detective Purdue has already testified. Yes, there is a likeness there. You will see the photo again of the painting that Brad Holder painted a year to the date that he was. You will find perhaps curious to the date that he was interviewed. He painted a painting and signed it the date, a year to the date, 3 days after the girls were found, and a year and 3 days. And then the posing of the body of the hanging man is similar to the way Abby is formed or was found. You will see fake crime scene photo that we talked about that we had to go to Georgia to get. That will be introduced again. And you will see that that is also a link that tends to show that Brad Holder was involved in this crime. You're then going to hear at some point from Amber Holder, his ex-wife. And Amber's going to tell you that, a number of things. And we first learned of Amber through the 12-page, what I call the 12-page Odin report. Yeah, folks, the 12-page Odin report is in actuality a summary of an 85-page report. That 85-page report has not seen the light of day. We only saw the summary. We don't know what else is in that 85-page report because it's nowhere to be found. My guess is Nick McClellan knows where it is. In a landfill after he shredded it. That is my belief. That's the one that Kevin Murphy testified that he and Lieutenant Holman got into a little bit of an argument about in the hallway. Yeah, Holman was so angry that the defense got a hold of the 12-page report that he actively tried to hide from them. This is how we found out about Amber. She's going to come in and talk then and verify that what she was contained in that report is true. She told Kevin Murphy these things and he wrote them down. Well, what are those things? Well, probably the biggest one. It tends to show that Brad Holden might have had something to do with he told her, quote, Patrick Westfall and I got into an argument near a river in the woods over a ritual that went wrong, end quote. That will be one thing that she's going to testify about. She will also talk to you about how Brad Holder, I guess he pointed a finger at Patrick Westfall. Quote, I didn't do this. Patrick Westfall and his crew did that, end quote. She will testify also about things that Kevin Murphy didn't include in his report, such as Brad Holder would cut his hand between the thumb and the forefinger and then bleed onto his altar. Brad Holder, you was... cut and doing a blood out, you moron. You will find out, by the way, Amber Holder is a paganist. And then Dr. Perlmutter will talk about the significance of that blood, and she will tell that often when human blood, once they get to the point where they are starting to spill blood, that's when things could really take a turn for the worst, and that's when ritualistic sacrifice may happen. Next, and she will talk about several other things. She will also tell you that Brad Holder said that Patrick Westfall was wanting to elevate from animal sacrifices to something else. Patrick Westfall, you will find, has admitted that he was into animal sacrifices. He, at least on one occasion, sacrificed a chicken. And again, Dawn Perlmutter will talk about why that's important. You will find out that Brad Holder had ceremonial knives, and that is important to Dawn Perlmutter. You will find out another reason to think that he might have had a tendency to be involved in this case is that the FBI emails called him out early on. Quote, this is a guy we're looking at hard, end quote. The state will talk about an alibi, and they're really going to rely heavily on this, but what you will hear today is, number one, that alibi doesn't apply if their timing is off. That's why that hard set that they have. The hard mindset of this is from 2:13 p.m. to 3:30. And the girls are deceased by then, and that's the end. There's no other possibilities out there. But if you find, Judge, that through the evidence, and you think that there's evidence that tends to show that at least a possibility that the Blocher report and other things, that the girls were not there at 3:30 p.m. Then Brad Holder's alibi is thrown out the window. You will also find that Brad Holder and the police found this, and you will hear about this. He posted on Facebook at 2 a.m. purportedly that I'm at the gym on the 14th, 2 a.m. I'm at the gym filled with testosterone. You will hear from his deposition testimony that that's the only time he's ever been to the gym at 2 a.m. was on February 14th, the morning those girls died. And we think what the evidence will tend to show is that might have been his attempt to create an alibi while other people were taking the bodies back, alive or not, back to where they were ultimately found. And then the phone. And that's when the phones turned on at 4:33 a.m. You will hear testimony about evidence about Patrick Westfall. He is an avowed Odinist. He has no alibi. These are things that tend to show, that you will find that tend to show that he was involved in the crime. He lived very close, within a few, 2 or 3 miles of where the girls were found. You will learn that he knows these woods. Johnny Messer, another guy that you will learn about in a moment, says that he and Brad Holder had been on the bridge, and again, Brad Holder said Westfall committed this crime. You'll also find out, I think, through Detective Cecil, that when they interviewed Patrick Westfall, kind of at my insistence from a deposition when they interviewed him last August. I believe it was the 17th. They wanted his phone. They knew that he knew that they were going to download his phone, and you will learn that he basically wiped his phone. Patrick Westphal had wiped his phone clean, but for the days prior, a few days prior going to the interview. Remember the Donna Adelson when they talked about guilty behavior? Ta fucking da. In the Karen Reed case, guilty behavior with Higgins destroying his phone. Now when Proctor thought that he removed all evidence from his phone by doing auto delete every 30 days, but he forgot that he downloaded everything on iCloud as well. Guilty behavior, folks. Guilty behavior. Then we're going to go down 125 miles from Delphi to Rushville, Indiana, and you're going to learn about Elvis Fields. Elvis. What evidence is there that tends to show that Elvis Fields was involved in this crime? Well, first of all, you're going to hear about Kevin Murphy and Todd Click, the other officer. They're going to say the evidence that there is very compelling evidence that Elvis Fields was involved with Delphi, starting with this one. That Kevin Murphy will testify, as I think he already did, that when we got, quote unquote, we got his DNA. You're going to find out from the 12-page Odin report, the reason that the police went down, they even went down to Rushville, is because Elvis had confessed to his sister that he had done this. And so that, of course, caused the police, in the course of their investigation, to go down there and talk to Elvis. He denied it. They interviewed him. You're going to learn that when they interviewed him, they wanted his DNA. And Kevin Murphy will tell you, they explain what the DNA is. And then when he dropped Elvis off at Elvis' house, Elvis walked out of the door of the car, stopped, turned around, and then asked a question. If my spit is on the girls and on one of the girls and I can explain it, would I still be in trouble? And that's, you learn, started a phone call to the Unified Command, and now Elvis Fields is on the radar screen. Well, what evidence is there that you're going to learn about that tends to show that beyond that statement, which might just be a dumb statement, was there anything else that tends to show that Elvis, 125 miles away, knew about what was going on up in Delphi? Well, you're going to find out that Elvis has admitted. He has admitted that Brad Holder was following him on Facebook. You will see the Facebook posting of that are side by side of that they are imitating each other. It's not even that Brad Holder would put out. Just an example. You will see one with handcuffs, with knives around, or weapons, and Elvis did the same thing. Elvis will say indignantly. Well, you can read it in the deposition. How indignant he was about it. I wasn't following him. He was following me. He knew Brad Holder. And you will read that deposition. He knew of Brad Holder. Well, how might that happen? Well, you're going to learn about Johnny Messer. Johnny Messer, this is another of that connective tissue that tends to show that these guys were involved in this crime. Johnny Messer was from Rushville. Johnny Messer knew Brad Holder and Patrick Westphal. Johnny Messer knew Elvis Fields. Now, Elvis Fields will lie. Has lied about it, said, I didn't know Johnny Messer. And Johnny Messer does admit he knew them. And well, okay, well, that's a weird coincidence. Why might Elvis know Brad through Johnny? Well, Johnny was the recruiter. And Todd Click will testify to this. Johnny was the recruiter for the Vinlander, which is basically a social club for Norse paganists. Or as I say, they are diaper Nazis cosplaying as paganists. They are twats. Whole lot of them. Sorry. That's a way that you will come to understand that. And Johnny Messer was a recruiter. Johnny Messer denies that he's a recruiter, but Todd Click would tell you, I talked to people that Johnny Messer recruited. Here's their names. Tends to show that Elvis and a guy named Rob Adams and a guy named Ned Smith were three good buddies. They were recruited by Johnny Messer, is what that will tend to show. Well, what else is there? Well, Elvis' alibi really is poor, and Kevin Murphy will address that. And then Rob Abrams and Ned Smith, you will find through deposition testimony and perhaps through testimony of Todd Clipp and Kevin Murphy that Rob Adams lied about where he can't keep his story straight, is what you will find out where he was on February 13th, 2017. Quote, I was up in Muncie. No, I'm down in Rushville. I know that I was in Muncie, but if my phone was up there, then probably it's not. Or it might be Ned Smith saying that says this, quote, but the hospital where we were at was preventing my phone from being pinged. So that's why you won't see the ping. Yeah, they are really that stupid. You're just going to hear a lot of evidence, Judge, about how they tried to cover their tracks about their alibis, and they didn't do a very good job of it. And you will hear that from Kevin Murphy. You will hear that from Todd Click as well, and from deposition testimony. I mean, you'll even find out that Rob Abrams, when he was asked in a deposition, he was asked, Judge, quote, how do you remember February 13th related to the Delphi murders? How do you know? And you will read it in his deposition where he says, well, I was there on the 13th and around noon. I watched the news and they were looking for the bodies. That's how I remember the 13th. Of course, the problem is that the girls weren't even lost at that point. And then, well, are you sure that wasn't on the 14th? No, it was on the 13th. I didn't even find out the girls were murdered until 3 or 4 days later. And you're going to find out these guys can't keep their story straight. And all of that would tend to show that these guys are involved in the crime. I'm going to try to go quickly here. Johnny Messer, you will find out, how might he tend to be connected? Well, you're going to hear from deposition testimony and a 12-page Odin report. Taylor Hornaday says that, quote, on or about Valentine's Day of 2017, Johnny Messer, my boyfriend at the time, was up in Delphi. Well, I shouldn't say that. That wouldn't be accurate. Was up there. She believed that to be up here visiting his buddies Brad Holder and Patrick Westfall. And then, when he came back with his car, it had blood on it. Ultimately, you will hear, I think, Kevin Murphy say that when he was starting to put these pieces together, everything fell in place with what he had been told by Unified Command. That it was multiple people, it was organized, and that's what these, as things became into focus, it tended to show that these guys down in Rushville were working with the guys up in Brad Holder and Patrick Westfall. The alibi also doesn't work for Brad Holder, by the way. If Brad Holder is acting as kind of the puppet master for a guy like Elvis, who you will hear from Kevin Murphy, was a guy that just wanted to belong, and he wasn't very smart. And Brad Holder, it tends to show the possibility that Brad Holder, at a minimum, was kind of running the show. Brad, and we'll talk about the Ron Logan, but I can kind of preview it, Keegan Klein. Anthony Schatz was communicating with Libby. And that tends to show that he is a suspect that we should be able to talk about. Ron Logan, we will be talking about. And what tends to show that he might be as a suspect, it is on his property. He lied about an alibi. These are things that you will hear. And so we think that we should be able to talk about them as well. We don't have to prove what we just said. We just have to show that these facts tend to show that these third-party suspects may have committed these crimes. And I think it'll be pretty overwhelming between Dr. Perlmutter and all the other evidence I've detailed. And so, at the end of this, we will be asking you to allow us to honor this 14th Amendment right and 6th Amendment right to defend himself against these allegations by showing the jury that these third-party suspects are very viable and that the state of Indiana and law enforcement just ignore them. Thank you. Yeah, and folks, at this time, the defense didn't know about Ron Logan's confession because the state actively hid the letters from Ron Logan's former cell buddy. They hid it. Detailed confessions from Ron Logan. This is the level of corruption from Nick McClelland. He was so desperate for a conviction that he tried to hide everything from the defense. And he could do that because Judge Gull allowed him to do it. Yes, all of this is before the trial started. The court, Mr. McClelland. Judge, I'll try to be brief. I feel a little silly reviewing the law with you, and you probably know it a bit better than anybody here. But the law, as Mr. Baldwin just cited, that's not accurate. It's not any evidence. If you show any evidence that somebody's involved, you can bring it in. And it's funny they bring up Lashbrook. That's a case that I've read several times over the past couple of weeks. And what Lashbrook is a case where the trial court said, you are not allowed to bring in that third-party evidence. And the Court of Appeals overturned that. And the evidence that they had in Lashbrook was that a third party was having an affair with the victim, that the third party was with the victim the night before death, that the third party worked at the same place as the victim, that he was late to work the next day after he was out with the victim the night before, and finally that in the case the victim was strangled or suffocated, and the bag that was used, inside that bag there was a hair found that was 98-99% probability belonging to the third party. There was strong, significant DNA evidence relating the third party to the victim and to the crime. And we know that Rick Allen's DNA was not at the crime scene, but there was unknown male DNA that you only tested to exclude. You probably believed it was, you hoped it was Rick Allen's, and when it wasn't, the initial test, you have a limited number of alleles. You can test those, you can compare those. It wasn't Rick. It was not Rick. And then they stopped testing. So yeah, Nick probably knew this. Shit, if we test the DNA properly, there might be, and that might lead to a third-party suspect. So they never tested the DNA. That's corruption, ethically and morally. And so the standard is not any evidence. That's not the standard. And there are other cases that I'm going to argue in closing that talk about this. And those include Pele, and we'll talk about some other ones. But what the standard is, Judge, is that it must be a direct material connection between the third party and the crime. And that has to be established by admissible evidence. And so while the state may not object to this exhibit come in here, because I know the rules of evidence don't apply, the connection has to be based on evidence that would be admissible at trial. Can't be based on hearsay, can't be based on speculation, can't be based on rumors, can't be based on a theory that the defense has gone or conjecture, can't be based on 404B evidence, has to be a direct material connection between the third party and the crime. Confessions are in the case laws. The court can also consider alibis for those third parties. The court can also consider the evidence the state has against the defendant in considering whether or not this third-party evidence comes in. And so the first rule I was ever taught is that don't make an opening statement if you're not sure you can prove everything you say in that opening statement. That's not in first-year law school, by the way. That is, I believe, year 2, when you go into what kind of area of law, and specific courses on trial strategy. He can't even be truthful about that. I think you're going to find, Judge, that when this evidence comes out, the state is able to debunk a lot of the things that Mr. Baldwin tells the court. He characterizes it in a way that's just simply not true. And so while the defense doesn't have to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that the person did it, they do have to prove that there's some connection to the crime. And you heard Mr. Baldwin's argument. Nowhere in that has he said, I can place any of these people in Delphi at the time of the crime. I can connect them to the crime scene in any way through forensic evidence, actual evidence, digital evidence. You hid those things, you fucktwat, from the defense. You hid all those things from the defense. He's given you nothing to say any of these people are connected to the crime, simply because the state has someone as a suspect or interviews somebody that may have information or knowledge about the crime. That doesn't equal third-party suspect. So any person we investigated doesn't equal third-party suspect. If that were the case, then the standard would be any. There'd be no nexus they had to get over, but the hurdle that they have to get over, especially in Lashbrook, is significant DNA evidence that connects the third party to the crime. That was the standard in Lashbrook. That's a high hurdle to get over. And so the state still contends that the defense cannot meet that burden. I'm going to ask the court to grant the motion in limine in respect to the third-party evidence. Judge, thank you. The court, you may call your first witness. Call Jerry Holman. The court, where is he? There's chairs right out there. Why aren't they just sitting right out there? They're trying to locate him. Just to move things around, put on Dr. Perlmutter. You may go ahead. Thank you, Judge. So here's Dr. Perlmutter. I saw her on, I think Bob interviewed her. She's very good. Yeah, I know. And yet they used Rick's confessions under duress in the middle of the psychotic episode. Yeah, that's the rules. Well, for the prosecution, they can use anything they choose. Anything. Sorry, folks, I have one of these fucktwats over at Twitch that it's a spam bot over at Twitch. For fuck's sake, Twitch, get a hold of yourself. Hold on while I... All right, we're done. Fuck's sake. I've said this before and I will say it again. People who create spam bots and pay for spam bots should be publicly flogged. Oh, where was it? Yeah. The prosecution can use anything they want. But they only use the things that speaks for their case. But if you want to debunk, then then the defendant has to testify to it. That's just the way the rules are now. So if 900 out of if 10, or in this case 60 confessions out of 900 complete ramblings speaks for what the prosecution want to say, they can ignore everything else. But if the defense want to, hey, didn't he also say this? Inadmissible as hearsay. Rick has to take the stand. The defendant has to take the stand to debunk that. And I don't agree with it, but that's the way it is. All right. State the name and spell it for the record. Dawn Perlmutter. This volume, Judge, I think what I'm going to do, just to help out, is I'm going to, and I don't know if this will help you. I don't know if you look on your computer or not, but I also have paper copies and whatever you prefer. They're called paper. Paper's better? Miss Bolin, okay. I'm going to hand you what I'm marking as. It's been marked at Defendant's Exhibit EE. Can you identify that for me, please? Hey, that's my CV. Okay, and you put that together? Yes, and it's updated. It's about 2 years old. It's not updated. Okay, is there any big missing pieces? Anything you want to add? Just a couple of cases that I worked on and a training contract. We may get to that. Let's start with some basic stuff. What do you do for a living? I'm the director for Symbol Intelligence Group and an adjunct in the Philadelphia College of Osteopathic Medicine in their forensic medicine program. Before we move forward, I wanted to kind of go through your CV with your help. On page 2, I think maybe, if it's okay, maybe if the judge were handed that. Okay. Mr. Walden, do you want to follow along, or the court? Are we admitting this? I'll move to admit. Offered, admitted. On page 2, Dr. Perlmutter, it says that you are subject matter expert in the area of expertise, and it lists symbols, symbolic anthropology, anthropological methodologies, atypical homicides, ritualistic crime investigation, and other things. What does that mean to be a subject matter area expert? It's a designation. It's a category like, engineer or program manager. But subject matter expert is also a government designation that equates to a specific pay grade. Okay, so we'll get is the state government or US government that has given you that designation? US government. And who would pay you money? As I consulted with the FBI on different projects, and that is what I'm brought in as. Moving forward, on page 3, there's a listing of books that you have written. Is this a complete list of the books you have written? Yes. Okay, I want to focus on ritualistic crime scene investigation. What is that book about? That is a field guide for law enforcement. If they are at a crime scene analyst, if they are at a ritualistic crime, what to look for, what symbols, instructions on what to do. Okay, and then at the bottom here, selected encyclopedia entries and book chapters. I'll focus on the first one here. Analyzing sacrificial violence. What is that about? That was an introductory chapter I did for a book that was edited, that had a lot of different authors writing on different types of violent murders. I see that blood sacrifices is one of the subheads there. Yes. Ritual. The next one is Ritualistic Crime Survey, Encyclopedia of Forensic and Legal Medicine. What is that? That was the survey entry for the Encyclopedia of Forensic and Legal Medicine that is used in Inaudible. You deaf court reporter. 52 inaudibles. Schools and medical schools. Have those entries been peer-reviewed? Yes. The next page is detailing law enforcement courses, development, instructions. Tell the judge a little about generally what you do involving instruction. I train local, state, and federal law enforcement agents, analysts across every branch of government. Going through some of those, ritual homicide investigation, is that a course that you have taught? Yes. That's a training I've done for over 20 years, and that is, again, case studies of numerous different types of ritual homicides and what to look for and how they proceeded through different process and that kind of thing. And you still teach that today? Yes. Okay. And did you say to whom you teach that to? Yes, to local, state, and federal officers. What federal officers, agencies? Again, Homeland Security, sometimes DEA, just FBI, different agencies. Now, the next one is ritualistic crime scene investigation. What's the difference between ritualistic homicide and ritualistic crime scene, those two courses? The ritualistic crime scene investigation is everything except the homicides. Like that can be theft of human remains, it can be blood rituals that are done with certain subcultures, mutilations, just every different type of manifestation of, that can be narco cults, Palo Mayombe, just different types of things that officers would come across that don't involve that short of homicide. Symbolic analysis methodologies. What is that class about? That's an advanced class that is for intelligence analysts and investigators on the actual methodologies. When they're analyzing different types of crimes, it's a lot of different. It's more than just behavioral analysis or investigative analysis. It gets into semiotics and hermeneutics, and it's a very theoretical class teaching how to apply different methods. Okay, and we'll talk about methodology later, I think. But the last one is racially motivated violent extremist and militia violence. What is that class about? That's the trainings I've been doing for the past couple of years. Racially motivated violent extremists involve like white supremacy groups, and when I do these trainings, I focus on the identifiers, all the different type of ideologies and religions that they hold, and like things like tattoos and rituals and initiation rites that would be associated with those groups. What is your educational background? My background, I have 3 advanced degrees. 2 are in art and art history, which applies in terms of, again, methodologies. A doctorate in arts and humanities from New York University, but that was interdisciplinary, so that involved anthropology, philosophy, and definitely methodologies. I focused on methodologies. Okay, and where you said art history applies to, art history is very relevant in that there's a methodology called iconography, where a lot of these different religions and ideologies have like pantheons of gods and goddesses. So in art history, paintings, historical paintings, literally they call them attributes that would go to each tradition, and that shows up as identifiers at different scenes. So that's how that's applied. Okay, what do you do? What are your kind of jobs at the symbol intelligence groups? Well, I do consulting. Case consulting and training, and we produce intelligence bulletins that are put out to the different fusion centers and across the country. What would you say are your qualifications as an expert on ritual homicide and ritualistic crimes? I have worked on dozens of different ritual homicide cases. I have experience with that. I worked on probably hundreds of ritualistic crimes, all at different phases, and have written literally, written books on this and the textbook on it. Just also have crime scene training and just a lot of years of experience. Have you, when you said you've been involved at various stages, what did you mean by that? Well, I may get called in while they're still at a crime scene, which, if it's unusual or atypical scene, or I could be called in at a point where it's already been adjudicated in court, or it could be a cold case homicide so all different points in time. So you get called in maybe at the beginning, maybe at the middle, maybe at the end. Exactly. All right. And have you ever testified in court? Yes, I've testified on 3 different homicide cases. A US case in a case that involved ritualistic crimes in the US Virgin Islands, and other cases that involved ritualistic crimes. And how would you divvy up helping out, if you want to call it that? Testifying on behalf of the defense, testifying on behalf of the prosecution. I only testified for the defense once before. I primarily worked with the prosecution. Where did you work prior to the Symbol Intelligence Group? I worked at NES Associates they were based in Alexandria, Virginia, and they had contracts with the Departments of Defense and an intelligence agency. I worked as a subject matter expert there. How would you say your education and experience is relevant to law enforcement? I'm applying a lot of the theoretical academic theories to law enforcement and have literally trained on what to look for. Because symbolism is a number of things. It can be graffiti, tattoos, codes, dates, insignia. So it crosses over a lot of different areas. It can cross over counterterrorism, and you get requests for information on identifying these different things to determine if a group is violent or things like that. What training, if any, I think I saw you teach a class on it, so I'm presuming you have training specific to white supremacy, or as in this case we talk called Norse paganism or Odinism. Are you familiar with those? Yes, that comes under the racially motivated violent extremists. Excuse me, and going back probably 25 years. I've been identifying the identifiers with that. I mean, because a lot of those groups, there's a lot of tattoos, there's a lot of initiation rites, there's all kinds of codes that confiscated documents that have coded messages. Are you an Odin expert, would you say? I'm not. I wouldn't say I'm an Odin expert. I would say I'm a generalist in the symbols of all these different groups. So I'm able to distinguish for somebody practicism, Odinism versus Christian identity, which is another white supremacist religion. So as a generalist, you're able to distinguish the different type of ideologies from what you're seeing at the scene. Would it help if you had some water? Inaudible, some water. Inaudible again. 53. Ta-da. I knew that would happen thanks. I want to talk a little bit about, while we're on the topic of Norse paganism and Odinism and white supremacy groups, how would you describe, like, if there are one working way that the Norse paganists operate, or is it multiple different ways? How would you describe that? Well, Norse paganism is a huge category. There are neo-pagans that are non-violent. There are dozens of different groups. They practice differently. They're decentralized. They can be geographically located. Then you have variations. They worship different pantheons of gods. Then you'll have racist neo-pagans that are very popular in the prison system and much more violent and do blood rituals. So there's just a lot of different types of neo-pagans. I mean, some refer to themselves as Asatru or heathenism or Wicca. There's a lot of different groups. If there was a group that might say they're Odinists in Oshkosh, Wisconsin, or a Norse pagan group in Columbus, Ohio, I mean, would there be any similarities between these groups? Or, well, if the Odinists, like other groups, they have general symbols that they share. The Odinists are, follow Odin and Thor and certain gods, and they have the same types of, symbols, the hammer, but as they splinter off and have their own kindreds, they're organized into kindreds. Their rituals will be particular to that specific groups. Okay, so they will generally have certain things in common, but then as they go into different areas, a lot of them do advocate for personal types of rituals. How would a group in an Oshkosh, Wisconsin group come up with their ritualistic practices versus the Columbus, Ohio group? Well, everybody seems to originally organize on the internet. Social media is a huge part of this now. And they will have Facebook pages, meetups, they'll organize that way. Or they will splinter from, the violent ones will splinter from like outlaw gangs and, the Vinlander Social Club. And they just have different leaders and change as the different leaders take over. And so is there a set way that anybody conducts a ritual or ceremony uniformly across the United States on any of this Norse stuff? Well, there are, just like there's general symbols, there are general things with rituals. Like they're all nature-based ideologies. So they tend to be conducted outdoors in wooded areas. They will, all these different groups will have altars, that kind of thing. But then it gets more specific after that. All right. Let's talk about methodology. Well, what type of research methodologies? What type of analysis do you use when reviewing a case? It depends on the things found at a crime scene. I do use what is called symbolic anthropological methodology, which is different than behavioral analysis, which is based on psychological methods. The symbolic anthropology method focuses on the culture, and you're interpreting the information from the person's point of view, their worldview, as opposed to forms of psychopathology. So it looks at different cultures and ideologies. So what does that? Can you delve into that a little bit more? Like the difference between the psych, how did you say that? Behavioral psychology. Hey! Karate Kid Mom is here. Hello. Hello. Good to have you here. Folks, if you're here, if you're lurking, please put something in the chat to see, so we see that you're here. You. Oh, behavioral analysis is that is the preferred method with, well, that is how most agents are trained, because it's based on Western logical rational thinking. And it's also a form of what they used to call profiling. So they interpret different type of behavior as either a personality by somebody with a personality disorder or some type of psychopathology where, with an anthropological interpretation, the person may have done a horrible violent ritual, but it can be initiation right, as opposed to somebody who's psychologically, a personality disorder. They're completely different ways of looking at the same type of information. Have you ever seen that be a problem in terms of law enforcement understanding what's going on at a crime scene? Yes, it happens quite often in these very atypical types of crime scenes. There's very little, if any, training on crime scenes you can walk in, you have terrible mutilations with animals and things written, just the worst type of, symbols cut into people. And there are these different traditions, like, for example, satanic ideologies. They do a lot of ritual murders, and they have certain symbolism specific to them. They would usually dismember or mutilate. They'll have pentagram type things there. If you have like Palo Mayombe, which drug traffickers do, they'll have like a called Nganga, which is like a cauldron with a human skull in it that was stolen from a grave. And so every different theme is specific, has very specific attributes and specific identifiers to the different groups. And they're quite different, and it goes to their particular traditions and what they're doing. Well, how would it be though that law enforcement getting wrong? I mean, I know a pentagram is Satanist. I would think that I know that at least, but how do law enforcement getting wrong sometimes? Well, it's just, again, it's methodological. It's perspective. If you're only interpreting things from a form of psychopathology and somebody's doing these heinous murders, it could be viewed as a sexual sadist, or it could be viewed as a serial killer without attributing the ideology that goes with it. So it's a different interpretation. It's a different perspective of this. What is hermeneutics? Hermeneutics is another methodology that I apply when there's text or certain types of symbols. It's the interpretation originally the interpretation of biblical text, but the methodology is taking ancient text or ancient type of writings and interpreting it how it's being used today, the intentionality, how the person is applying it today. It's different than linguistics and philology, which translates what a code is. This is looking at trying to interpret in how it's being used at, for example, a crime scene. Okay, I want to talk about that for just a second. And I don't know if this is when we're talking about the behavioral, the Western thinking versus what you're talking about. But is it wrong for police to want to interpret, oh, I want to know exactly what this means, or what did you refer to when you made an interpretation? There's like linguistics, or if you show up at the crime scene, I think it would be natural to know, what is this guy trying to say? What would he say? What does these symbols mean? Is that important, or is it more about, I'm just trying to figure out this? I mean, well, it's very important to figure out who did it. And the biggest distinction between sort of behavioral analysis and the anthropological approach is, with behavioral analysis, they are thinking rationally. It's a rational Western perspective, where most of the people doing in these different ideologies and religions, they think magically. So magical thinking is a huge part in interpreting what's going on, because they're not thinking about it logically. So if they leave items there, it's not because they're leaving it. They accidentally left it. Everything has meaning. Everything at the scene has meaning. Are they doing it as an offering or to gain power, achieve certain things? That is the significant difference. From a rational, again, it's very hard to apply rational Western thinking to why somebody would do certain things. That phrase, magical thinking, is that your phrase, or is that kind of an industry term? It's a common term. It's used for example, people who are like superstition would be a form of magical thinking. Prayer is actually a form of magical thinking. It's things that don't have a rationale, logical cause and effect. So the cause and effect is that if you sacrifice a chicken, that's going to make you have good luck. That is not a rational way of thinking. That's a magical way of thinking. Is Norse paganism or Odinism, does that involve magical thinking? Absolutely. All of, yes. Keep going. All of what? Well, most of these neo-pagan groups involve magical thinking. Well, what part of Odinism or Norse paganism is magical? Like what aspects of it? The whole belief system. The idea is that, well, it's pre-Christian, so they are polygamist. They have a lot of different gods, and the ritual that are done, it's the belief that you have an altar and say certain things or arrange things in a certain way, that you're intervening in your life, you're making things happen. Whether it's their way of prayer. We heard of runes. What are runes as it relates to Odinism? Runes are, in Odinism, Odin was considered the father of the runes. He discovered them after he hung on the world tree, for 9 days. But runes are an ancient, they're a Nordic language, and they're imbued with magical qualities. So there's different. There's elder Futhark and younger Futhark, and they're used across the spectrum. A lot of different groups use runes, but they're very specific to Odinism as an identifier. What about blood as it relates to magical thinking in Norse paganism religions? Well, blood rituals are part of Odinism. It depends, in my opinion. In this context, yeah. I mean, the racist Odinist version, where it would evolve, there's a concept of blooding the runes, where you're kind of consecrating your runes. You could have an altar and doing things with blood. So it's also, some do animal sacrifice. But is blood magical? Maybe it's just not saying that right. Blood is sort of the highest offering historically and across cultures. A blood offering was always one of the highest offerings. It represents life and death, the sacred and the profane. So when it appears at a crime scene or being used, the offender usually understands the meaning. Is it personal to them? Or is it something that everybody that would walk into a crime scene would say, oh, I know exactly what this means? No, it's usually personal. A lot of these things are rituals that they're doing, personal rituals for their own. It's encouraged actually in a lot of these groups. I'm going to put on just so, I don't know if the court can read that, but it may not work here, but I want to talk about what are the indicators, and you teach a class on this. So, yeah, you probably don't even need me to put this up here, but what are the crime scene indicators that you teach law enforcement to look for when they come on a scene? And I'm just going to go through these one at a time. These are items you gave me? Yes, is that correct? We just kind of put it on a poster board so you can kind of guide us through it. Ritual murder crime scene forensic indicators. Number 1, place of death. Why is that important? Well, the place of death is very indicative of the type of ideology you're looking at. And like I said before, the neo-pagan, the Odinist, are all nature-based ideologists. So they do their rituals in clearings, outdoors. In fact, they have usually near bodies of water because they're dealing with the natural elements. If you have, for example, an indoor homicide scene that's ritual murder, and I had cases like that, where there's more indicative, somebody's doing a copycat of a film or something. It's not, the place is very significant. Attorney James Luttrell, Your Honor, may I just approach the board to make sure? The court, sure. Mr. Luttrell, it's the court, yeah. I have a copy of, thank you, Your Honor. You're welcome. And in a moment, you will be looking at crime scene photos as we're going through these various indicators. What about the date of death? That's another thing you gave us that is an indicator of a ritualistic crime scene. Yeah. What does that mean? Dates are significant. Sometimes homicides occur on. They can occur due to astrological moon phases, celestial events. They can occur on specific holidays, political or current events. So one of these things I always check are that particular date. If it equates to a certain ritual that different groups do on that date. So yeah. We'll talk about that as it relates to this case in a minute. Now, cause of death is the third forensic indicator for a ritualistic murder crime scene. What does that mean? Cause of death is, of course, very, very significant because usually in ritual murders, there's a lot of torture, blood loss. You don't get bullet wounds. They're very usually stab wounds and, again, involving torture as part of what they're doing. Okay, so the cause of death can tell you something when you're on the scene. Yes. And you can point to different types of groups. Like I said before, certain, like cartels they will do a lot of beheading ritual type murders and then put the heads on altars. And you have Satanists who will carve symbols different. They tend to do different type of things. So what they do is very important. All right. Number 4 forensic indicator you have is the murder weapon. Why is that an indicator of a ritual murder crime scene? Because the weapon of choice is usually a knife, a ceremonial knife. It's very rarely found at the scene. It's something that would be an object that would be very important to the offender, and that's what makes it part of the ritual. It's a ceremonial object. Next is the symbolism at the crime scene. What is that? Well, everything from things carved into things hung at trees, on trees, carved, sometimes again, like I said, carved on victims. Interestingly, what happens a lot, which I train officers on, is with these outdoor scenes, they will use natural objects as part of the scene. They'll use branches either to create a circle, or they use rocks or create symbols with the natural items at the scene. Okay. Body disposition is also identified as a 6th ritual murder crime scene forensic indicator. What does that mean? How the body is positioned has very specific meaning to the offender. It's, one of the ways of indicating that it's a ritual murder is that it's not a counter-forensic measure. What is a counter-forensic measure? If somebody is just committing a crime and wants to get away with it, they will hide the body, bury the body, or to avoid biometrics, they'll, cut the fingertips off or things like that to avoid identification, or to literally hide from, so that the police can't investigate either who the victim is or who the offender is. That's not what happens in ritual murders. The body is positioned in a very specific way that has meaning to the offender. Would it have meaning to anybody else that might walk onto the crime scene? It may not, That's why you're trying to interpret what. And lastly is atypical blood pattern. What does that mean? A lot of times the blood of the victim is used as part of the rituals. It's used in the symbolism. It's used a lot of times on the body. It can be almost like to anoint the victim on their face or a lot of things. A lot of atypical, unusual things are done with the blood of the victims. How would you define a ritual murder? A ritual murder is a murder that goes beyond conduct required for the killing, that is not a counter-forensic measure, and has unusual behavior or symbolism. And folks, this is why the state, the prosecution in this, and the witnesses was so adamant in saying that these sticks and branches on Abby and Libby were there to conceal, which is horrifyingly stupid. There were literal tons of leaves all around where they were found. They could, if they wanted to hide them, they wouldn't have just picked one branch there, sawed off a branch there, put it on, They would have just taken the leaves and poured it over the girls. It would have taken minutes to actually hide the girls. But they claim, no, the sticks. They were there to hide. It is insanely stupid. But it fit their narrative. What do you remember reviewing for this case to form some opinions as to whether this was what happened in Delphi, Indiana on February 13th and or 14th, what a ritualistic murder? The actual items I reviewed? Yeah, just so the judge has an idea of what you're basing your opinion on. I reviewed crime scene photos, the autopsy reports, the bloodstain pattern report, a report from BAU, I think Indiana State Police, and I'm trying to a lot of social media postings, and a ceremonial video, and a police interview video. What did you ultimately conclude about the scene here? In my opinion, this was a textbook ritual murder. It has all of the elements that are listed there. And when I talk about indicators, like, for example, when you're doing fingerprint analysis, you need like 12 to 15 matches to have a good indicator. this has numerous indicators of the type of things that you have at a ritual murder. Okay, we're going to go actually through the 1 through 6. I don't know that we're going to hit 7, but place of death, ritual murder crimes in forensics, indicator number 1. I'm putting this on the easel, and then I'm going to hand the court and mark it so that we know what the judge was looking at. I'm handing the court exhibit FF, and I would ask that it be admitted into evidence. Offered, admitted. So this is a crime scene photo. What about this crime scene photo causes you to believe that it applies to number 1, place of death, that determines it's a ritualistic murder? The aerial view really shows, in a lot of these cases, that it's almost like a clearing, and in this case, it's surrounded by trees. And during these rituals, they have to separate designated sacred space from like profane secular space. So they need a clearing to where they do it. And this, and being near a body of water, is very, very common too. Okay, I mean, it's significant to you that where the circle is, that there's a space there. I put the circle in because it's typically referred to as a casting the circle. And even neo-pagans, when they do it, they separate they're sanctifying the space for the ritual. It might not be a perfect circle, but the fact it was a clearing and they're not like, at near, relatively close to the water. So is that considering a strong indicator or just an indicator? It's a strong indicator. Number 2 is the date of death. Does that date correspond to a holiday? What does your research reveal on that? Well, the only holidays that fall between February 13th and 14th is one. And there weren't any celestial events or anything at that time. It's called Valisblot. It's an Odin holiday for the son of Odin, Vali. And it actually is a sacrificial holiday. That is actually correct. The thing with Nordic holidays is they're from sundown to sundown. So even though it's on the 14th, it starts on the 13th with sundown. Okay, so the fact that these crimes occurred on the 13th and the 14th is because of Valisblot. What does that tell? I mean, I think it's kind of obvious, but what does that tell you? Well, the dates can be. They're not as strong an indicator. It's just another thing to look at it's a specific Odinist holiday. There's other dates like Samhain and Beltane. There's ones that are very specific to other groups, but none of the others fall in this area. So is it a strong indicator, at least in this case? It's one indicator, yes. All right, the next is cause of death. Sharp force injuries to the neck. Tell why the cause of death in this case is an indicator, forensic indicator, that this was a ritualistic murder scene. Because with sacrificial, and there's different types of, like I said before, there are different types of ritual murders. They're done for different reasons. So, for example, there's exorcisms that can be done with fire. I had a case where a little girl was burned to death in an exorcism. You have other cases where the bodies are dismembered for different reasons. But the specific slitting of the throat is indicative of the sacrificial offering or initiation type. It's true that is, again, throughout history and across cultures. That's how sacrifice is done. It's by cutting the throat and letting the blood come out. Okay, I'm going to move to omit just the autopsy reports as evidence of what happened to these girls. And did you review the autopsies? I don't remember. I reviewed the reports and the photos, yes. Move to admit exhibits GG. Offered, admitted. Is there anything more to be said about that you haven't already said about the cause of death related to this case as an indicator? No, Next, we'll talk about the murder weapon itself. I'll show you here this board and move to exhibit A. Did you review this item? I'm going to move to admit II. Offered, admitted. And I don't want to talk about a third party yet. I just want to talk generally speaking. Yeah, that's an altar. It's an Odinist altar, which is indicated by the object there, the Thor's hammers. The candle, the runes, the rune pouch, the sword, the knife, personal photos, and the glass of mead or whatever liquid substance was. And would it be common that a knife might even have been used in a sacrificial ceremony, might be a part of this altar? Yeah. And I mean, we'll get into it so we don't belabor the point. What do you think that is important in this case? The photograph related to the third-party suspect. Yes. Why is that? Because it indicates that the person thinks magically, is practicing Odinism. There's a ritual knife involved, and is part of the social media images. And this, for the record, this is social media that was found on Brad Holder's Facebook page. Is that correct? Yes. So next is symbolism at the crime scene. This one I want to be very careful with, so bear with me. I don't want to talk about the third-party component of this yet. I just want to talk about the symbolism. We're on to the symbolism at the crime scene, which is the fifth forensic indicator. So this is, and I'm going to move to admit the paper version of this. Mark this as Exhibit JJ. Move to admit. Any objection? Mr. McLean, Judge, as long as we can explain a proper foundation, I guess I'm a little fearful of. I want to make sure this is clear. This is not a post from Brad Holder's Facebook page. This is something the defense is creating from collecting various portions of discovery. I don't want it to be mischaracterized as this is a post from Brad Holder's Facebook page. Mr. Baldwin, fair enough. As an officer of the court and going on in this case, I'll try to do that. The middle portion, foundationally, is a crime scene photo that we were given by the state of Indiana, as well as the photograph here on the right. That was not given to us at the same time. We put those together. And then this one is his Facebook post, and we received that in discovery, and we will be offering them together for purposes of demonstrative evidence. No objection. Thank you. Question. But I really want to focus at this time on the middle photo because, again, we are talking about symbolism at the crime scene. What is that indicative of as it relates to ritualistic murders? The branches was carefully placed in that arrangement. It appears to be identical to the marking, and it's the person is creating some type of symbol. In this case, after reviewing everything in the context, it appears to be what's called as a bind rune. What is a bind rune? A bind rune is when you combine two or more runes and to create personal symbols or to combine the power of the two different things. It's done quite often, and it's a very common type of practice, which, magical practice. Sorry, I had to kind of do my thing while you were talking, and I know that's probably distracting. Mr. Baldwin, I'm going to move to admit this is LL. I'm sorry, KK. No objection, admitted. I'm going to hand you what's been marked as KK, although it's 19 on the copy I'm handing to you. Okay. I want you to review that and tell me what significant that is. The significance of this is the person is discussing on their post how they had put a mark on their body. It was the Jibo rule. And it felt like different things were happening in their life, that it wasn't the gifts the gods were giving him, both positive and negative. He felt he had to add another rune to it, which he did. The Isa rune over top, creating the bind rune. And then literally at the end of the post is, repeating Isa rune, Isa Gabo, Isa Gabo. And then he combines the words Isabo. This is Isabo. This is indicative of somebody who's thinking magically. They are indicating that they believe that the mark they have put on was having certain things happen in their life, and that they added the second rune to control aspects of their life. So this clearly indicates somebody who believes in this type of rune magic. And that is, for the record, that is a Facebook posting from Brad Holder. Is that correct? Yes. And this is the close-up version of that hand, the marking on his hand. Is that correct? Yes. Again, you talked a little bit a second ago about why is that significant, this compared to the stick arrangement found on that body. It's identical to it. It's somebody who is the exact same configuration. Is there any way that's a counter forensic activity, the 3 sticks found on this young woman? No, it would be, they're not hiding the body at all. It would not work. It doesn't function that way at all. And there were other indicators in what I reviewed of a number of runes being done in the sticks. There were a number of social media photos of the scene, not just the marking, but sticks in the shape of runes. So there was rune magic being done in branches in the woods. And we are talking about with this person named Brad Holder. You reviewed his social media pages. Yes. And you saw lots of sticks that were specifically arranged as into bind runes. They were done in wooded areas, and that was prior to the homicide. Okay, see what the next, still on the symbolism at the crime scene. I want you to look at the other. I want you to look at the way that Libby's body was displayed. Well, I'll use this one. I'm going back to Miss Bolin. Judge, I don't know which exhibit that was. FF. Looking at the stick arrangements on Libby's body, does that tell you something about the forensic identified symbolism at the crime scene? That had specific meaning to the offender. It's, in my opinion, it's intentional. The branches was placed in a very specific way. It's obviously not a counter-forensic measure because she's completely exposed. It could also, when interpreting this, it could also be a combination of the positioning of her body could be considered like one type of symbol. The branches on top could be another. The important thing is that it had specific meaning to the offender, and it wasn't to try to hide the body. Did you compare that when looking through the various? Let me see if I can find this one here. Mr. Baldwin, I might just have to mark this one. Now here it is. All right. This one will be the smaller version of what's on the poster board. This is called LL. Move to admit. Offered, admitted. Thank you. Oh, I know. I also moved to admit whatever this would be. Move to admit MM. And I didn't want to make a poster of that. Offered, no objection, admitted. Thank you, Judge. Okay, actually, if I might, just be careful with this if you would. I'm going to hand you what was just entered as MM at this. Another copy of the, did you have a chance to look at that? I guess what would have been LL and MM. Yes, and this is what I'm referring to before with the arrangement of these branches in the woods. The arrangement of which they are, in my opinion, runes. And being on these social media posts. And the arrangement is very similar, almost identical to the arrangement on that victim. On the victim, okay. And what does that tell you? As you're trying to find, you teach these classes. You're trying to find the suspect. What does all of this so far that we've been talking about tell you? Well, it tells me that it's a process of what it isn't. And it is not. Like I said, in categories of Satanism or exorcism or narco cults or gangs, these are natural objects that are being used and consistent with social media postings, with literal rituals that are being done in the same configuration. So it shows that it is a connection to that person. For the record, LL was Brad Holder's Facebook post that was of the two sticks, runes as you call them, correct? Yes. That's your opinion. Specifically bind runes. Well, this actually is, we're looking at Mr. Bowman. I'm sorry, Josh, I can't remember which one this is. You told me about 3 times. FF. We're looking at FF, the poster-sized version. Let's move on to that 5th or the 6th indicator, body disposition. And from FF and the blown-up version, at least, can you comment on the way the body disposition is indicative of a ritualistic crime? Because of that, again, it's not obviously a counter-forensic measure. The careful placement, positioning, the natural objects on top of the bodies, also the symbols at the scene. So body disposition and the cause of death inside that sort of creation of a sacred grove or a clearing area is, and all classic indicators of a ritual murder. Okay, and I want to show you, this is the blown-up version, inaudible. 54. I think we started today with 43. So 11 inaudibles in the span of, quite a short while. I move to admit the NN, which is the smaller version for the court. Any objection? Judge, no objection. And again, the same clarification as before. This is an exhibit that the defense has created. It's not from Facebook post. It's I want to say a triple side-by-side picture that the defense has created. Okay. I agree, it is. I'll show NN is admitted or without objection. Admitted. Thank you. Talking still about the fifth, sorry, body disposition. What does this exhibit? Show you. Middle image is a painting from a social media page of Odin hanging. George, I'm going to object at this point. Can I ask some foundational questions? Court, yes. Okay, we clarified this as something that the defense is creating. Now you're testifying this is from a Facebook page. Have you observed the Facebook page? I observed, no, I did not. So you don't know where the image is from. It was in the image that I was given to review. I understand that. But you don't know where the image came from. I didn't see it on the Facebook page. I'm sorry, I didn't hear that. I'm sorry. I did not see it on the Facebook page. So safe to say you don't know where the image came from, but you saw the image and it was given to you by the defense. Correct. Okay, so Judge, I guess I just asked the court to, strike in their own mind that this is from a Facebook page. There's no foundation she can testify to that. I don't have any objection to being an demonstrative exhibit from the defense, but beyond that, Judge, I object. Okay. Mr. Baldwin, as an officer of the court, I would say that this is off the Brad Holder's Facebook page. It's the painting that I could give you the reference. In fact, I think I already did this on Tuesday. He laid the foundation that he painted this, made this painting in his deposition. I have that. Maybe on a break, I can give that to you. Court, okay, that's fine. Thank you. So what does this hanging man and the body disposition, which is the sixth indicator, why does that? What does that tell you about this third party who posted this? The positioning of the legs, particularly, are identical. The image itself is a very common classic. Of the painting is a classic depiction of Odin. It's used in tarot cards, although tarot is not part of this. But it's an image that's very common in Odinism, where you have it depicted during sort of the primary event where he's hanging on the tree for 9 days, discovering the runes. And that is significant because the classic image usually has the other leg bent, but the painting is the same leg and the same positioning of the leg as the victim. Also, in the painting and with the victim, the eyes and mouth are open. If I were to represent as an officer of the court that this painting, and in low lighting, you can't really see here, that Brad Holder, that this painting shows that it was signed and dated February 17th of 2018, which is 1 year to the date that he was interviewed by police. Would that mean anything, or is that I'm just trying to be a defense lawyer and do defense lawyer things? Well, if that's the case, then that's fine. No, dates do. Anniversaries, commemorative dates that have meaning to people. It may have meaning, the fact that it's almost the year anniversary of the homicide. But again, it goes to that person, right? The individual, that what it means is the meaning to that person. So it would be really unfair for us to ascribe some meaning to that. Would that be accurate? Again, these offenders they create everything's very personalized. The rituals are personalized. Even though it starts out in the context of an ideology, there's so many different manifestations of these different ideologies that everybody personalizes it. They're encouraged to. I want to take a look at that, or the corresponding. You're looking at the bigger version of OO. If that's, I'm sorry, may I move to admit OO? Any objection? Nope. Admitted. Okay, so this is a crime scene photo. What is the significance of this as it relates to a forensic indicator? The significance is that the stronger significance is that it's in the victim's blood, and it's a marking on the tree near at the scene, and it, in my opinion, is an intentional mark. It's not like an obvious symbol under, again, Satanism or other types. It appears to be consistent with ancient alphabets that are used quite a lot in these scenes. Sometimes you get Enochian or Eden or Arabic or Hebrew. You get a lot of different ancient alphabets that they believe imbues it magically. This is most consistent with runes. And again, with runes, they are depicted a number of different ways online and historically. So they're stylized. They're different fonts. But that's what this appears to be. It is an intentional mark, and the significant thing is that, which is very consistent with ritual murders, is that the victim's blood is being used to create a symbol, which gives it magical efficiency. It gives it more power to what the person is doing or thinking. What you're talking about here is the F tree. The F tree is some 20 feet from where the bodies were. They found blood below the tree. And somehow her blood went from where she was to on the other side of that tree, a bit up. Now, how probable is it that the victim itself did this and then bent backwards to put it up there? It's not, folks. It isn't. And if you go back to this so-called confessions from Rick Allen, wouldn't that be something he would have told in if he was the actual killer? Yeah, I took my hand into the blood and put it on the tree. Wouldn't that be something the real killer would have told? Never happened. Never happened. Somebody put it there. Wasn't the victim. Wasn't Rick. Somebody else. Oh. Let's see here. Oh, Twitch acted fast. The spam bot has, yeah, they have acted on it. I don't know what the action was. Yeah. If you actually take a good look at what we know about the crime scene and then compare it to the so-called confessions, it should be obvious to a person with a normally functioning brain that this is a very complex crime scene, extremely complex crime scene. And Rick Allen's so-called confessions talks about an extremely simple crime scene. I was startled. I cut their necks. I took off. There's too much on the crime scene for that to be correct. There's simply too much. Question. I think you read the blood spatter report, and then they don't view this as an intentional. They view it as something else, but I'm not a blood spatter expert. I've taken some training in it, but this to me is an absolute intentional mark. It does not seem consistent. Unintentional. Okay, whoever wrote that report, explain in detail how blood came from here and the ground to the other side of the tree unintentional. Did the blood do a magic bullet thing that it splattered out, changed direction, traveled around? This is insanely stupid. It does not seem consistent. Well, we will move on to this. This is the big version. We look at the smaller version of that, which is right here. Move to admit PP. Admit it. Tell the judge what this is. These are 3 still images from a ceremony video that I... Miss McLean, Judge, I'm going to object to the question. Maybe some foundational questions. The court, sure. Mr. Bowling, I'll ask them. McLean, okay. Did you... One of the things you said that you received earlier was a video of a ritual. Is that correct? Yes. And did you watch that video? Yes. And what did you do what you then do with the video as it relates to this. I stilled 3 of the images to be able to discuss. Okay, so you took still shots of them. Yeah. And then put them on this poster board, or I put them on the poster board, but though what the images would be good to inaudible. Inaudible number 55. Yes. Miss Bowling, all right, move to admit. The court we already did. Already did. Question. What is significant about this to you? This was an Odinist ritual. The part that at the very beginning, they're in an outdoor wooded area near water. They are casting the circle, sanctifying the sacred space, which is how they initiated the ritual. They're using the symbolism. They're talking about Lagos, runes, and the water. So it's essentially a kindred of or a group of people who are doing an Odinist outdoor ritual. And then they're making offerings to a tree. Different people at the end of the video are bringing different things and placing it at a large tree. Okay, and for the record, we laid the foundation for this on Tuesday. Brad Holder has identified the person touching the tree in this photo as Patrick Westfall. And I will let you know that, Judge. No, I'm going to put up kind of the same photo, but also side by side that we created, the defense, or maybe you did. Did you create that? Yes. Side by side with the tree from the crime scene with Libby's blood. I'm going to admit this as QQ. Offered, admitted. Why did you do this side-by-side presentation of who I said is Patrick Westfall touching the tree in that ceremony in Fort Wayne, Indiana, and this crime scene photo? To indicate that, again, it was another indicator of the use of a tree as not as part of the offerings, as part of the ceremonial type of thing that Odinists engage in. And in that video, he was the only one who did that type of offering. Other people just brought like bowls and things. We're almost at the end of this. Take a look at that. Let me find the one. This would be RR. Was this in the packet of stuff that you received from us? Yes. Move to admit RR. Offered, admitted. Why was this significant to you in terms of trying to assess third-party suspect in a ritualistic crime scene setting? This was a posting, a social media posting of an altar, an Odinist altar, again, indicated by the objects on it, the ritual items. And the person who did the posting was talking about how he put a rune in his own blood on the tree 2 weeks before, and it was still there. And the date 2 weeks before would have been about 2 weeks after the homicides. And to be clear, the person posting is not Brad Holder. Is that correct? Correct. But Brad Holder did like this post. Correct. And you circle. What is it that you circled there? The rune was done in blood. Again, just another indicator that this is the type of ritual, a blood ritual that was done by an Odinist group that identified themselves as the Asa True Warriors. It's so fucking corny that these white supremacists cosplaying as Aesir are actually doing this pile of garbage. Question. Now when you've been saying all the way through here that it is personal, whatever each kindred or whatever each individual person, what's personal to them? So does it mean something when you see this? What you're calling a rune on this tree, and there's what you're saying is a rune in Libby's blood on the tree. Is that meaningful? Well, that he identifies as a rune. I mean, clear. The person identifies that as a rune. And again, it's to demonstrate that this is a practice that was being done among these groups that are seeing each other online. And lastly, I think we start wrapping up here. Is this going to be SS, I believe? Take a look at that. Move to admit SS into evidence. Offered, admitted. I submit to the court that this was what the defense called the faked crime scene photo it was found on. Mr. McLeland, Judge, I'm going to object to him characterizing what the evidence is because the state doesn't agree with that characterization. And I think the evidence will show today that there is no foundation for that. So I object to that. I don't object to the picture being admitted, and maybe something that she can consider in her analysis, but not to the characterization by the defense. The court, I'll sustain the objection of the characterization. Mr. Bowling, I'll submit to the court that this is a foundationally was Trooper Purdue has said that he saw this on Brad Holder's this image on Brad Holder's Facebook page. So I think that's what we've established, Mr. McLean. And I don't think that's what his testimony was, Judge. And he's here to testify today, so we can get it from him. Okay, if that's the case. Okay. What can you, if this was on Brad Holder's Facebook page or a suspect's Facebook page related to the crime scene, what would this indicate to you? The depiction of two girls or young women posed with in a similar manner with, one posted in a similar manner with three branches on top of them. It's indicative of the crime scene positioning. And again, is it common for people who may have committed a crime to go online and show kind of indicators of that crime scene on social media? A lot of in different cases, you're going to have different things. Sometimes you find a diary or a book of spells or whatever they're doing. In other cases, social media has become the way for people to sort of to show off, for lack of a better expression, their rituals and what they've done. I'm going to finish up here on direct examination with a couple questions. Based upon your kind of research once you received this case and were asked to look into it, did you know whether there were any Odinist groups, or were there any other Odinist group in Indiana 2016-2017? Yes, there were groups that splintered. You had the Soldiers of Odin that are splintered into the Vinlander Social Club, which also had a branch of Firm 22, which 22 is the alphanumeric code for V. So they're sort of support and women members. And then that might also splintered into Guggenor's Path. Oh. I don't know. I'm not exactly sure what they are talking about, Abbe. It's hold on here while I just yeah. Guggenor is these imbeciles, these retarded individuals, is how they try to write the Old Norse word for gods. So what they're trying to say is path of the gods, but they direct translate, because we don't use of the gudarnas väg. So they just go Guggenor's path. These people need to be institutionalized, because these are not clever people. Jesus Christ, this is so stupid. So there were also Soldiers of Odin. There was the Auto Hammerskin Nation, the Vinland Social Club splinter off of them, an extremely violent gang. And you said earlier that these violent Odin gangs, were they do they have white supremacy? They are all the racist Odinists, the white supremacist racist Odinists. And did you say earlier that these are the splinter Odin groups that believe in blood sacrifice? Yes, they've done murders. So a ritual murder would be a progression. Do you know, or are you aware of whether there's any human sacrifice in Odinism? There are literature that shows different cases of sacrifice every 9 years, and there's different reference to it in some of the writings and literature of the. Yeah, this is correct. Way back when, 1,000 years ago, yes, it happened. Extremely rare, only performed by what you would probably call shamans. Here's the thing. The few human sacrifices, the rare one, were volunteers. could be a warrior who lost an arm, who hoped that this would bring him to Valhalla. A person who used to be a warrior but aged and could no longer participate. Stuff like that. But always volunteers. I would suggest that if these Odinist gangs would to these imbeciles if you want to cosplay Aesir, how about you volunteer yourselves next time? Designate one person to do it, and then all of you fucktards volunteer. How about that? No, you won't, because you're selfish cunts who murder instead. Fuck you all. Fuck you all. Hang on a second. If the BAU or the prosecution were to claim that what was going on there at the crime scene was called an undoing, would you agree with that assessment? No. An undoing is, from the behavioral analysis, is a symbolic reversal of a crime. It's when a person feels remorse or guilt, and they will either, position the body so they look like they're sleeping, or they will cover the body with a blanket. They're staging, but they're not doing it as a counter forensic measure. They're doing it out of the remorse they feel. So with the way that they're so displayed, with undoing, you're trying to give the person sort of dignity in death. There's no dignity in the way these girls were positioned. The only thing that might have some relevance is redressing does occur. Dressing the body is an undoing behavior, and is usually done by someone who's familiar, knows the person, a family member, or, something like that. So in that one aspect, it would possibly be an undoing, but one is a psychological concept, the other, in my opinion, it's a ritual, and it was done for ritual purposes, not true as a counter forensic measure and not as a form of remorse. Okay. Any doubt in your mind that this was a ritualistic killing? None at all. No other questions? The court, Mr. McClelland. Thank you, Judge. Now, does her testimony have some weaknesses? Yeah. Especially if the BAU and others have made their conclusions. Some of them are obviously retarded, especially when it comes to the F tree, where the blood was drawn on the other side of the tree. And they say it wasn't intentional. Then how the fuck did the blood get there? Jesus Christ, this is so stupid. Now, let me just check here how long his cross-examination is. Oh, recross. Redirect. Okay, let's go back to page 101. Okay, let's go to Nick McClelland being a piece of garbage. Miss Perlmutter, we talked about your education and we talked a little bit about where you're employed. Do you work exclusively for the government? I work with different departments. The university, the Philadelphia College of Osteopathic Medicine, is a non-government one. Do you also do consulting like you are here today? Yes, case consulting. And you get paid for those privately as well, right? Yes. So you do consulting or testifying work on the side besides the job at the university and the government? Yes. And so it's part of how you make your living is to testify about these things? Yes. Okay. What training do you have specifically to recognize when a crime scene is part of an Odinist ritualistic killing? The training I have is to identify different symbols and rituals that occur. So it's a process of elimination, and in this case, that's why I identified it as. Well, okay, well, let me back up. Any of the books that you've written, have they dealt exclusively with Odinism? Not exclusively, no? Okay. Any of the training you've given to any kind of government department, have they dealt exclusively with Odinism? Not exclusively, but they're definitely part of the one-day training I do on the RMVEs. Have you had any training specifically on Odinist ritualistic killings that narrow field exclusively? No, and I don't know if there is any training on that available. And so if that's true, which I think it is, that there is no training, how do you educate yourself about a discipline? Well, it comes from doing research, going to a lot of conferences. Go to gang conferences. I've done lectures at those conferences. I did have another homicide case. It's an open investigation, but it clearly has similar types of symbolism. We'll get to that part. Okay. Do you agree there's a difference between a ritualistic killing and a gang killing? They're not always mutually exclusive. Depends on which gang and what they're doing. Let me ask you this. If I'm in a break-off gang of Odinism, say the Hammerskins, and I murder somebody, does that mean the murder scene is an Odinistic ritualistic killing? No. Okay, so there's a difference, right? Yes. If it's a gang killing and I just kill somebody and I'm an Odinist, that doesn't necessarily mean it's a ritualistic killing, correct? No, it doesn't. Okay. And especially since they usually use firearms. Let's say they don't. Let's say they use a knife. Just because they use a knife doesn't mean it's an Odinistic ritualistic killing, correct? No. Okay. It's the combination of, okay, we'll get to that. But just because it's down outdoors, does it mean it's a ritualistic killing? No. Okay, in this Odinistic ritualistic killing, through your research, who is typically what kind of human is typically sacrificed in these ritualistic killings? It has meaning to the offender. Okay, with the white supremacy groups, they target minorities, right? Yes. Have you ever seen a racist Odinist group targeting 2 young white females? They will do that if they can. It's a yes or no question. No. Okay, but the name itself, racist, would mean some minority group, correct? Or race traitors? Yes or no? Yes. Okay, so if a racist Odinist group kill a white female child, that would go against the racist part of their group, correct? But it could also be an indicator of other things. But through your training and experience that you've seen, you just testified. You never in your experience have you seen a racist group kill a white child. That would be against what you learned and what you've seen, correct? Correct. Okay, to be a ritual, the name alone, at least to me, implies that it has to be done over and over and over. Idiot. Idiot. In these Odinistic ritualistic killings, have you seen that? Are these killings done over and over and over? That's not a correct definition of a ritual, okay? That's not how I would define a ritual at all. Let's back up. How many Odinist ritualistic killing have you seen in your career? There is an open investigation the other homicide case, and that was in 2020. And so there's an open investigation on that case, yes. And so I assume with the investigation being open, that whether or not it's an Odinistic ritualistic killing is still open as well. Yes, correct? You talk about various Odinists have general symbols they share, but the rituals are particular to the individual person. Is that correct? Yes. Are there any symbols in the ritual that are the same across the board? They use the hammer, they wear the pendants. Those are the general type symbols. They get rune tattoos, raven tattoos. Let me show you something here. And this is... You guys made me buy this. Thank you. You guys made me buy that. I don't have one of those by myself. Just for the record. And then, where did I put that? Oh, I have, folks, you who have been here before, you know I have arthritis in my knees, which means I usually walk around with a cane of sorts, and this is one of them. This is a 2.5 solid oak cane. Yeah, this will hurt. It's a self-defense cane. I have another one with a wolf's head in solid brass. And I have one with a solid brass raven handle. Because if I'm going to stumble around for the rest of my life, I'm going to have some fun with it. What was that necklace? It was the Thor's hammer. With 2 wolves. So that is what it is. Yeah, let's continue. Those are general type symbols. They get rune tattoos, raven tattoos. I guess I didn't answer the question very well. Oh, are there any symbols left at ritualistic crime scene that involve Odinism that are universal across the board? Universal? No. Whether it be state or the defense team, when someone asks you to examine a crime scene, what evidence do you typically look at? I typically look at any kind of symbolic or forensic evidence. So the scene, the crime scene, autopsies, social media, computers, anything that falls within my areas of expertise. Those. Do you see how she tries to finish her answer? And what does he do? He interrupts her all the damn time. Does the party hiring you, do they typically give you all the evidence and let you sort through it, or do they handpick which evidence you look at? They pretty much give you everything and I review it. And so when you're reviewing those things, is it important to look at the other people that were investigated? Yes. Is it important to look at their background and any evidence that the law enforcement or defense may have on that person? Yes. Would it be important to look at any depositions anyone's given? Yes, it would be. Mr. McLeland, your guys lost 70 days of interviews. The first 2 weeks and then additional 55 days. You lost all of it. So would it be important to look at any of those things? Yeah. But you lost it. That, yes, it could be. Would it be important to look at the suspect's deposition? Yes. If you come into a case after somebody's arrested, is it important to you to look at the defendant's statements? Yes, it can be. Is it important to look at any alibi evidence? That again might be outside of the realm of what my area is. And so if you're looking at social media posts of a person that was a suspect, it wouldn't be important to you to see if that person had an alibi. Again, that's not my area. I look at the symbolism, the forensics, the language that's used. That is nothing. I've never looked at that type of evidence before. In this case, you reviewed the things that you looked at the defense had given you, correct? Yes. Did you examine anything outside of that? No. So you never examined Brad Holder's interviews? No. You never examined Brad Holder's Facebook page? No. You never examined Brad Holder's deposition? No. You never examined evidence that showed where Brad Holder was that day? No. Did you examine any evidence that the state has against the defendant? No. Did you examine any other suspect's information? I looked at the police interview with Patrick Westfall. So you looked at the evidence. The only evidence you looked at is what the defense spoon-fed to you or gave to you. She's a defense expert. This is so stupid. but this is quite normal for prosecutions. And if the glove was on the other foot, this would be what the defense would do to a state witness as well. So it's not uncommon. In US, case must have a rubber tip bottom to not be considered a weapon. Mine have. Oh. See? So, this is not a weapon, but it will fucking hurt. And for the obvious question, Nick, do you have a cane that you can pull out and be a sword? Folks, that would be illegal. Let's continue. I looked at the evidence that was provided to me. When you looked at the evidence, was it organized in the way that the exhibits are today? Were the side-by-sides given to you in that fashion? No, I did that. Well, you didn't do all of them. Some of the side-by-sides that were presented in evidence today were done by the defense as a demonstrative exhibit. And were they given to you like that? Like the side-by-side of the stick, or the picture of Brad Holmes' hand, and the picture of Abby's body at the crime scene? That was given to me, but I had already, that was given to me. Okay, correct. So the side-by-sides that the defense created, they were given to you in that fashion. That one, yes. Okay, when you're looking at evidence, I don't even know if there's an industry for what you do, but are there industry standards of what things you're to look at when examining a crime scene? Well, that's why the methodologies are so important. I mean, that's why I have crime scene training. Go to the crime scene conferences. The methodology is all those types of that are listed. Place, date, holiday, just all of the causes of death, things like that. So those are industry standards, those place of death, date of death, cause of death to you. Those are industry standards that someone in your position would look at to determine whether or not this was a ritualistic killing. Well, there are also FBI standards. I mean, they have the same victimology. They have categories under that. They may call it different things, but it's in the same homicide manual that I've studied that too. I'm familiar with. They're the same things that everybody looks at, except I go more specific into symbolism. So out of the things that you listed, place of death, date of death, cause of death, murder weapon, which is the most important? I would say the cause of death. It's the most significant, and the body positioning. Let's talk about the cause of death for a minute. You said that it was important that they were cut. Correct. Their throats were cut. That they were and yes, the sharp force. Correct. Okay. Does it matter how I mean, I've seen a lot of movies where when they sacrifice, they come from one side of the neck to the other and cut it that way. Is that what you mean when you talk about? No, it's not that specific. It's the fact they died from the knife wounds, sharp, yes. And so the fact that someone died from a knife wound, that's the most important thing you look at when determining whether or not this is a ritualistic killing. To the neck, to the knife wound to the neck. Right. That doesn't mean every killing that there's a knife wound to the neck is a ritualistic killing. No. Right? Absolutely not. That doesn't mean that if someone is an Odinist and they kill somebody with a knife wound to the neck, that doesn't mean it's a ritualistic killing, correct? Correct. It's all very personal to whoever did the killing, correct? Correct. But it's in combination with all the other things. Well, let's go back to that. You said several times it's all personal to whoever did the killing. You're just guessing what these symbols mean because only really the killer knows, right? I wouldn't say guessing. It's significant that somebody did a symbol in blood. It's consistent with other ritual homicide cases. And again, he interrupts her. But it's significant to you. It may not be significant to the killer, and you don't know that, correct? I guess that's one way of saying it. Talking about the cause of death. One of the things you said that there's signs. There's usually a lot of torture, usually a stabbing. When you looked at the crime scene here, did you see any evidence of torture? No, there was no evidence of torture. Were the victims bound in any way? No. Were there any symbols carved in the body? No. Do you know what murder weapon was used to kill the victims? I do not know if it was a serrated blade. I don't know. Did you assume, from the evidence that you saw from the defense, that it was a knife? I think I'm trying to. I remember reading I might have been the referenced in the autopsy report. I'm not sure if a knife, or maybe the BAU report. I think mentioned somebody. There was mention of it was a serrated knife. If a knife wasn't used, would that change your interpretation of the crime scene? If there was a bullet wound, that would. What if it was a box cutter? Yeah, here we go. This another thing that is absolutely pissing me off with this case is how people in law enforcement changed their opinions after Rick said something in his psychotic ramblings. So at one point in time, he said something about a box cutter. Magically, coincidentally, by pure chance, the medical examiner, you know, the guy who didn't check the body temperature, had an eureka moment days later. Oh, now I know. It's not two different knives. It was a box cutter. Isn't that strange? That the opinions of law enforcement and witnesses change after Rick said something? Isn't that strange? Same with the van. You know, something only a killer would know. Yeah, so you used Brad Weber, the lying piece of garbage, Brad Weber, who lied for 7 years about where he was on the February 13th. Up until trial, he lied about what he did that day. And not until after the trial, we found out not only that he lied in 2017, he lied under oath in court as well, saying, I was there around 1:30. No, the video shows you there at 1:44. You lying sack of shit, Brad Weber. Magically, when witnesses in this case, how they changed their minds depending on what Rick said under the influence of Haldol, a psychotic break in solitary confinement. Let's continue. What if it was a box cutter? That would not change the interpretation. So any sharp object in your mind, that's a symbol. In one case, it was a letter opener. So yes is the answer, yes. Any sharp object, that's a symbol to you that this is a ritualistic killing. If they're using it, combined with everything else you saw, if they're using it in that situation too, what's that situation? In an outdoor scene with the body position and in the woods near water, the one positioning of the bodies, the whole combination. Positioning of the bodies. Do you agree that Abby, her body is right where she died? It was not moved. I don't know she was dressed or undressed, so she had to be moved for that to happen. I don't know if she was moved from a distance, but her, well, how do you know if she was redressed before or after she died? I don't know if she was redressed before or after, but somebody had put clothes on her because she was wearing undergarments. To redress somebody, you're manipulating the body. I don't know if but you're assuming she was redressed after she died. I don't know. I mean, you have to, right? Because you're saying to redress the body, you would have to reposition it. Well, if she got dressed before she died, there wouldn't be any positioning of the body. I didn't say she was redressed after she died. No, she never said that. That's McLeland doing a straw man. Okay, we'll move on. Do you know for sure that Abby's body was moved? I don't know. I think that her leg was positioned that way. And what are you basing that on? I'm basing it on it doesn't appear to be natural. It just, the sticks were placed on her. No, we're not talking about the sticks, just the body. He's again interrupting her. I can hear in my head how he's acting in the courtroom right now. He is high-pitched, whining, bitching, being a brat. Maybe his hair plugs were hurting that day. I don't know. I don't care. He was being a cunt. Okay, he was being a cunt in the court. What gives you the indication that her body was positioned in that way? It's just, in my opinion, it's that if you're dressing someone, that when you're putting pants on, that your leg is not going to cross over. I think, just the fact that in combination with the other body being positioned. But for that assumption to be correct, you're assuming that someone dressed her after she died and positioned her body that way either while they were dressing her or after they dressed her. I'm not saying that she was redressed after she died. And again, how do you know her body was? We're talking in circles here, and I'll go all day if you want. No. She's not talking in circles. You are. Because she doesn't answer the way you want to, because you're entitled little shit. How do you know her body was positioned? Because it's consistent with the rest of the scene. Okay, it's consistent with, how is that consistent with the rest of the scene? It's consistent with LG being moved and positioned. If you do the area view, both their bodies seems to create, they appear to be positioned. How do you know Libby's body was positioned? Oh, her body was moved. That wasn't my question. How do you know she was positioned? I don't disagree with you, she was moved. How do you know that the killer positioned her body in that specific way she was laying? Because of the combination of the branches that were put on her, the way that she was displayed. Let's talk about the branches for a minute. The area view of the picture is, did you see any other or any varied angles of the crime scene besides the area view that's been admitted into evidence? Yes. And so did you see pictures of the crime scene from the water? I don't think I saw it from that angle. Did you see the crime scene from the opposite side of the water? From the other side of the bank? Yes. No, I don't think so. This is fucktard McLeland trying to indicate, because the claim is that the search party stopped at the other side of the stream. And since they didn't see her, it must mean that she was covered up enough for somebody to not see her. Here's the thing. Both girls were white. More or less translucent white. Somebody with a flashlight in the darkness of between February 13th and 14th, if somebody would have taken their flashlight and just to look at the other side with a flashlight, they would have seen it. Because the whiteness of that body would have shown in flashlight. They weren't there until the next day. Until after the actual killers saw that they've gone home, because they announced publicly they were going home. We would have known if the medical examiner have checked the fucking body temperatures. Mr. McLeland. Sorry, George, I'm going through my notes here. There's quite a bit of exhibits. I want to make sure I cover everything. Miss Pearl Mother. It's doctor, you fucktard. You talked about some of the exhibits of Facebook posts from Brad Holder. Those Facebook posts alone, does that mean that can you tell from those Facebook posts alone that Brad Holder participates in Odinist ritualistic killings? I can tell that he practices Odinism and believes in magical thinking. I appreciate your answers, but it's going to go a lot quicker if you just give me your answer my questions. From those posts, can you tell that Brad Holder participates in Odinist ritualistic killings? No. Okay, can you tell from those posts that Brad Holder participated in this killing? That's not why she's there, asshole. No. Can you tell from those posts if Brad Holder does animal sacrifices as part of his Odinist belief? No. Can you tell that he does human sacrifices as part of his Odinist belief? No. Is there anything in those posts that places him at the scene of a crime? No. I wish you would have said because of the painting indicates he had intimate knowledge of the crime scene. Or the pictures of the other two women that were on his Facebook page. The symbols that you talk about seeing at the crime scene, and I'm trying to wrap my head around this, but when you're going to participate and examine the crime scene, do you go into the crime scene of, okay, I'm specifically looking for symbols I recognize? No, not at all. I go in with an open mind to see if it's a symbol at all. If it's a, or what, I go in very open-minded. Okay. If someone were to give you a picture of a symbol before you looked at the crime scene to say, I'm trying to equate this to looking at cloud formations. If somebody, would go outside and say, oh, look, I see a train in that cloud. It's hard for me to unsee that. If somebody gives you a picture of a symbol before you look at the crime scene and says, hey, I'm looking for this symbol. Do you see it in this crime scene? Do you think that affects the way you look at the crime scene? No. You're able to separate that? It's actually part of the methodology. It's called bracketing. You have to bracket it out. It's something that you're trained to do. And so when someone gives you a side-by-side photo, that's part of the methodology of examining a crime scene. You, as a professional, you look at it individually. And I have thousands of symbols that I compare things to. When you talked about the things you would look at, you testified it would be, or typically, you would look at the suspect's deposition or any other statement that suspect made. Is that correct? If it's provided to me, I usually am given evidence that's relevant to imagery, symbolism, codes, or any kind of atypical trauma. I don't always occasionally I get computers that connected to like music or social media. I'm not usually given the other standard things you would get with an investigation, like alibis. Do you agree that it'd be important if the crime scenes are so personalized and individualized? Would you agree that it'd be important to get as much background information about the suspect as possible? Yes, and sometimes I get writings or diaries or manifests. In this instance, you got Facebook posts, right? Well, I get a lot of social media. Sure, that I do get. But do you agree it's important to learn as much about the suspect's background as possible before making a determination because these crime scenes are so personalized? Yes. And so if you came into an investigation after someone was arrested, would it be important to you to have the background of the person arrested? Yes. Would it be important to you to have any statements that person made? Yes. And you didn't get that here? No. Was there any indication from you that this crime was sexually motivated? It did not appear that way. Why didn't it appear that way? From the autopsy reports, there were no indicators of sexual assault. So you're basing that just on that. And it's usually there would be sexual assault if they were sexually motivated. Does it have to be indication in the autopsy report for a crime to be sexually motivated? I guess not. Fair to say a crime could be sexually motivated, but before the sexual assault occurs, the crime is committed. Fair? Could you say that again? Sure. The crime initially could be sexually motivated, but before any kind of sexual assault occurs, the person kills the victim. Yes. If the defendant said that, would that be important information for you to review before you made your analysis? That analysis starts going into the behavioral analysis aspect, the psychological. And I look at that is not my area. Yeah, so here they are going by the so-called confession from Rick after, I believe, 8 or 9 months in solitary confinement and 2 months of Haldol in a supposed confession to Dr. Walla, where she destroyed the notes and then she wrote it down in a storytelling kind of way. That Rick told her he drank beer, went out because he wanted to grape somebody, went out on the trail, found Abby and Libby, forced them with him, and then he got spooked by the van, who we know weren't there at that time. That is why he's asking these questions. Here's the thing with criminals of that type. When you go through their computers, phones, everything, you will find plenty of evidence of their sexual deviance. Plenty. You will find violent porn. You will find depictions of things. Nothing in Rick Allen's forensic data tells anybody that he was sexually deviant, that he planned something like this, even had thoughts about these things. Absolutely nothing. But under Dr. Walla, after months and months of solitary confinement and Haldol, he started to say things that he thought in his psychotic mind that Dr. Walla wanted to hear. And then they formed the prosecution after that, not by actual evidence. You said the sticks are no doubt in your mind. The sticks are there for a symbol, as a symbol. They're the ones on Abby, yes. The one on Abby, but not on Libby. Libby, they're there because they meant something to the offender, whether they're an alphabet, a seal, a rune, or they had some meaning to the offender. You're confident they weren't for any kind of countermeasure or to cover up the bodies. Absolutely confident. They're not covering the bodies. They're absolutely not working that way. They're not functioning that way. But if the crime scene is personalized to the individual, how can you make that assumption that they weren't put there to cover the bodies? Because the bodies aren't covered. Not completely covered, right? But there's some coverage. Just minimal. That, I think, is just obviously not done to cover the bodies if they're not covered. I mean, is that what you're basing your opinion on? They're not for countermeasures, but they don't completely cover the body. Yes. And so therefore there must be symbols. No, not therefore it has to be symbols. It was it was a ritual act, in my opinion. It was a ritual that was done that had meaning to the offender. That there were a lot of ways in that scene that they could have covered the bodies with leaves and things. That's not done. That's not what was done. They were arranged in a very specific manner. If the defendant made a statement that the branches are there intended to cover the bodies, would that change your opinion? No, I don't think it would. So regardless of what the defendant said, you're going with those are part of symbol. I'm going with they had different meaning to the offender. Would it change your mind that the defendants here admitted to killing the girls? No, it's still. Would it change your mind that he admitted killing the girls and his defense team had admitted he has no oath in his ties? Would that change your mind? No. The blood on the tree. How confident are you that this is a symbol as opposed to blood spatter? I'm extremely confident. It's an intentional mark, in my opinion. It's an intentional mark. You have no training or you have minimal training in blood spatter. Correct. So how can you rule that out? Because of the appearance of it and the context that it's in with it being done at the scene. That is the context it's in. Can you explain that to me? What context is the blood on the tree in? I'm going from my experience in a number of cases where the markings are put on trees at these types of scenes in blood. And from my experience, this is consistent with that. You've had other cases where you examined crime scene where this marking has been left in blood at the crime scene. Not that specific marking. But you have minimal training in blood spatter. Correct. And you rule that out. Yes. And you rule out contact and transfer as well. Correct. And we talked a little about this, or Mr. Baldwin did. If the BAU examined the evidence in this case and said that it was the sticks were a form of undoing, your testimony is that they're wrong. My testimony is that's their perspective. They're trying to analyze it in that way. That's how they're trained. Folks, I want to know what the BAU was given. I want to read that fucking report. The BAU's report. And so analyzing these crime scenes is all about the perspective you bring into when you analyze it. No, it's about a completely different methodology. Looking at it from the cultural anthropological methodology as opposed to behavioral analysis. And you use that methodology when you examine this crime scene. Correct. McLellan, can you have just a moment? You may. Miss Perlmutter, on the chart where that Mr. Pauling put up, there were seven things listed, and they never really touched based on number 7. But number 7 was atypical blood pattern, and underneath it says atypical blood pattern on victim's face. What did you mean by that? There appeared to be on Libby's face an inconsistent pattern with the blood. There was a reference to it, I think, in the blood spatter report. Miss Perlmutter, when did you first look at the evidence for this case? I think about 3 months ago. So we're in July. I'm going to say April 2024. Yes, I should have. That's when the evidence was given to you by the defense. I should have checked the date. I think it was around April. The exact date is not important, but around that time, sometime in April 2024. Correct. And you talked about that's some of the evidence you used, maybe not all, every time, but that evidence you used to make a determination of whether or not this is I think you used the classic or textbook ritualistic killing. Is that correct? Yes. And is it important for you to examine that evidence before you make that finding? Yes. How important? It's important to examine the evidence. I mean, common sense says it's important to examine that stuff before making an analysis, so your analysis is correct. Yes. Is that fair? Yes. Back on September 19th of 2023, did you appear on Court TV? Yes. And you gave an analysis of this killing at that time. Is that correct? Yes. And prior to giving that analysis, had you observed any evidence from this case? I just read a Frank's memo. Did you observe any evidence from this case? No. And on that television show, I hope I get this quote right, but you told them that this is a classic ritual murder, correct? From the description, yes. And you told them before examining the evidence the defense had given you, correct. Folks, if I remember correctly, she talked about from the aspect of the Frank's memo. That is what she was asked. Now, you're in business of consulting and testifying in these type of cases. You testify to that you get paid to do these things, right? Yes. And so if you were on Court TV, a natural program, and say this is a classic ritualistic murder, then you change the story. That may hurt your business, correct? That is not what happened. I reviewed the report, which was very specific, and I gave my opinion. And looking at the evidence, if it was different, I would have changed my opinion. Is it in your practice when you're examining crime scenes to look at motions filed by the defense to make an analysis of a crime scene? That was given to me by the Court TV people. I understand that. Are there any other cases where you examine a crime scene where you looked at a motion from the defense to make an analysis of whether or not that crime scene is a ritualistic killing? That was, goes outside your standards, correct? Yes. Okay, I don't have any other questions, Judge. Mr. Baldwin. So, redirect. When did Court TV become testimony? When the prosecution thinks it hurts the witness credibility. You said something about a serrated edge, and that was in the, you believe, in the autopsy report. It was either the autopsy or the BAU report. It was mentioned, I think, in one of the reports. If it was in the autopsy report, would that be in evidence? Do you know if a box cutter has a serrated edge typically? If you don't know, that's fine. I don't think they do. It depends on the type of box cutter, by the way. Okay, you were talking and trying to answer, and you said something about race traitor. What were you trying to say there? I think the question has anybody ever seen racists who kill white people? White supremacists target minorities, Jewish people, and anybody they consider a race traitor. They also get into like gang with each other. I mean, they were talking members of their group that they feel didn't do certain things correctly, or was an informant, or there's a lot of other reasons they will target. All right. And just for everyone's understanding, that when you're in an Odinist group with racist kind of ties to racism which is more prevalent in terms of if, and I don't even know if you know the answer to this, which is the more driving force, the Odinism or the racism? They just go hand in hand. It's fundamental to the racist Odinism, because they feel that Christianity mongrelized the pure Aryan traditions, so they identify with what they think is the original warrior culture. When you were asked by the state about this defendant here not having any, the defense has represented there is zero evidence that Richard Allen has any ties whatsoever to Odinism, runes, Norse paganism, any type of cult. Would that be consistent with that crime scene? That somebody that committed those crimes, somebody has no knowledge of that? That would not be consistent. No other questions? Recross. Miss Perlmutter. You talked about race traitor. Did either one of the victims fall within, to your knowledge, did either one of the victims fall within one of those categories you talked about under being a race traitor? I don't have knowledge of that. So no, to your knowledge, neither of them fell under one of those categories, either minority, Jewish, and I think you named something else. Informants, and the other, no, they don't. Okay, no. I believe it is Abby's mom who dated a black person. And Logan was with Abby. It was Abby, right? Yeah, Abby. People like the Vinlanders and the people associated with the Vinlanders are mentally ill. I don't care. I'm not a psychologist, so this is my layman's. And what offends me so much, these are my ancestors, the actual Aesir folks. These are my direct ancestors. And then you have these fucktards, Vinlanders or whatever they call themselves, who, hey, you're mixing the blood. Do you have any idea how far the Vikings traveled and who they took as wives? They went to fucking Constantinople. They went to North Africa. Seriously. They didn't care about the color of your fucking skin. They cared about strength and honor. So what these twats are, when they are jumping around pretending to be Aesir, they have no fucking clue. None whatsoever. Informants, okay, no. You said the driving force, Mr. Baldwin asked you what is the driving force, Odinism or racism, and you say they go hand in hand. Does that mean they're equal? They see it as their religion. It's their belief system. So I guess you can't separate the two. Racism is so ingrained in Odinism that's what you mean when they go hand. It's intrinsic. I think you said hand in hand to it. Intrinsic, okay. It's intrinsic to it. And so to your knowledge, were either one of these girls part of a minority that they would be racist against? Not that I know of. Okay, would it be unusual for a racist Odinist to kill somebody that they don't classify as a minority or part of the race traitor? These, again, they are splintered from violent gangs, so there can just be reasons, because they didn't participate in some organized crimes or whatever criminal activity they were involved in. They could be related to someone that they're, retaliating against. It can be that way too. It can be the motivation, can be the combination of those things. In this offense, did you have any information that played into your analysis that was the case in this crime? I didn't have. And he keeps interrupting her. That the killer was trying to get back at the victims for some reason. Is there any information that you had that was factored into your analysis? I didn't have a lot of information on the victims. Okay, the victimology. Would that be something important that you'd like to have in order to make your assessment? Or are you comfortable with making your assessment based on what you got? I'm comfortable with making my assessment. Just a moment, Judge. I don't have anything, Judge. Thank you. All right, thank you, Doctor. You may step down. Thank you. The court, all right, we're going to go ahead. It's almost 1:30. I'm sorry that we went over, but I wanted to get the testimony done. Thank you. So she could be on her way. So we'll break for lunch. Be back at 2:15. 2:15. Off the record. All right, folks. 3.5 hours. I think I'm done for today. This is pissing me off to no extent. And if you've been here before, you know, you knew it would. You knew it would. Dr. Perlmutter was there. What are the symbols here? Are these actual runes? What does the positioning do? Stuff like that. I have no clue why the people who killed Abby and Libby, why they did it. What I do know, at looking at the actual evidence, all the evidence, not just the things the prosecution wanted us to know for so long, it wasn't Rick. It was not Rick. All right, folks. Thank you all for showing up. Thank you for allowing me to do this. Next weekend, we will go through the rest of the day. There will be more testimony. I think the next one is it's a deposition. And then it's time for Jerry Holman. And you know what's going to happen when every time Jerry Holman, the reading will be done by his third cousin, Arthur Holman. You can call him A. Holman. But again, thank you so much for being here. Thank you for allowing me to do this. And I will send you off with the free Rick Allen song. And then I'm going to send you somewhere. Hit the like, hit the subscribe, you know, all the YouTube things. And I will see you in the next stream or video. See you. Bye-bye.
Down in the shadows where the courthouse stands, a gavel cracks a fading hands. Judge Gould, they whisper with a crooked grin, played the game where justice don't win. Free Rick Allen, let him go. Chains on the innocent, don't you know? When the truth's been buried and the lies unfold, the fire in the people burns hot and cold. Prosecutor McLean with his papers tight wrote the tale that never saw light. Twist twisted words in a room of stone left Rick Allen to stand alone. Who will answer? Who will pay? The sun don't rise on a judgment day. Free Rick Allen, let him go. Chains on the innocent, don't you know? When the truth's been buried and the lies unfold, the fire in the people burns hot and cold. Officer Holman, eyes like frost, drunk on power, the line got lost. Lock the doors, keep him inside, for justice limps where his footsteps stride.